Hello and welcome to the For the Record podcast. I am joined by Luke J. Williams to discuss season 1 of the new hit HBO TV show that everyone is talking about, The Last of Us. Luke, welcome back.
Hello.
So before we get started, this podcast will be spoiling all of season 1 of The Last of Us and elements of the first game. So if you haven't seen the show or don't want to hear comparisons to the first game, this is your warning. The Last of Us has been the hit TV show of 2023 so far. It's done incredibly well both critically and in terms of ratings, and it seems that everybody is watching this show, not just fans of the games. And that's what I wanted to kick things off with, because we're both big fans of The Last of Us video games. So Luke, do you want to share your history with the games before you watched the show for the first time?
Yeah, of course. I was kind of a late bloomer with it. You know, I only got my PlayStation in 2019.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't have one. I had like PS2 years ago, didn't really have it, so I missed the whole thing when it came out on PS3. I'd heard lots of things, never been spoiled, and you were really pushing me.
I peer pressured you.
Yeah, quite a lot. Like, I had bought the game with the console, so I had it like ready to go, but I wasn't playing it, and then you like forced me to do it, and it was fucking great. It was a great time. I played the remastered for PS4 edition on the PS4 in 2019, smashed it out in like a month, or maybe even less than that, and it was amazing. It was really fucking good.
I remember when The Last of Us came out back in 2013, I was browsing YouTube, it was like school holidays or something, I was browsing YouTube, and it was just everywhere on my feed. Everybody was talking about this game. Like, everyone who I was subscribed to was doing walkthroughs, and it was all everyone was ever talking about. And I decided, because I couldn't afford to buy the game because I was only young, I decided to watch a walkthrough. And to this day, it remains the only time I've ever watched a walkthrough from beginning to end of a video game.
Really?
Yeah, but I was so incredibly captivated. This shit was like crack for me, man. I was waking up in the morning, refreshing YouTube to see if the new part of like the walkthrough had been released. To this day, probably one of my favorite video game experiences, and I wasn't even playing the game. I was so incredibly blown away. And then like a few years later, when I got my PS4, I eventually got The Last of Us. And then I finally got to play it myself, and I was surprised to see just how much I enjoyed playing the game, even though I knew like all of the story beats. It still felt incredibly new and fresh. Then a few years after that, I went back through and played the game on the highest difficulty. It's like a DLC difficulty that wasn't in the base game. That's even harder than like the hardest difficulty in the base game.
Is that the Grounded?
Yeah. Played that shit on Grounded. Got all of the trophies. One of the most stressful experiences of my life, but honestly like one of the most rewarding. And to this day, The Last of Us, the game, is a top 5 video game for me, which is saying something because I've played way too many. But yeah, we're both massive fans of the game, so clearly like we're the target audience for an adaptation like this.
Yeah.
Look, video game adaptations, they've had their problems in the past, and they have the reputation of being really quite terrible. Like, there's been so few successful video game adaptations, whether it be like a movie or a TV show or anything really, that it just seems to be something that production companies really struggle with to get right. Look, heading into this one, like, there were a few question marks. Do they adapt the game like story beat by story beat, or do they just make an adaptation using new characters in the Last of Us universe? Then you have the budget issues that come with adapting video games. Adapting video games is a lot more expensive than adapting, say, a novel. Video games are incredibly expensive. The Last of Us is an incredibly expensive game. So to bring that to life in a TV show format is and proved to be incredibly expensive. I think the budget was like $100 million for season 1.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a really big budget for...
I guess for an HBO show though.
True, but it's a unknown quantity as well. This isn't like a franchise that's proven to be successful. They were taking a bit of a punt. And another big problem I have with video game adaptations too is they always seem to feel really superficial, right? Like, they're not made by gamers or true fans of the games. They're made by corporate people. They always feel corporate, like they don't get it. They try and appeal to the idea of the video game, not the heart and soul of it. And time again, like, we've seen bad examples, and I think it's fair to say that like having Neil Druckmann, the writer and director.
I think that's really like the important like difference between that and the other adaptations is that Neil Druckmann was heavily involved.
Yeah, he was
this production.
He was the lead showrunner.
Yeah.
With Craig Mazin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
amazing, by the way. Craig Amazing.
And yeah, I think having him on board helped ease some of my doubts heading into this show, because
knowing he was involved.
Like, there were a few things going for this show, right? Like, if we talk about the expectations heading in, because this was announced a while ago, it was a bit of a wait, and it kind of snuck out out of nowhere, to be honest. And I had some doubts, but a few things that made me feel a bit safer was Neil Druckmann's there, right? He wrote the game. He was the director. He's a showrunner. That's a huge tick for me. Having someone that's directly involved from the game in the TV show is absolutely essential, and I'm so glad that they did that. Second thing was HBO. HBO is the best production company for making television, hands down, and they've proven it time and time again, and they've proven that they can do adaptions as well.
Yeah.
And they weren't afraid to splash some money at this as well. Having that higher budget, higher production value really helped make this show, feel realistic and true to the games. Like they had a lot of care go into that. But I did have some concerns, like talking about expectations heading in. A big one for me was the casting of Ellie.
I think that's the main thing for a lot of people. Like that coming up was one of the first things you saw after it was announced. The casting was announced. We get Pedro Pascal as Joel, Bella Ramsey as Ellie.
Yeah, and I think no one was really jumping up and down about Pedro. Pedro is a hugely popular actor.
He's a household name now. He's in like a lot of shit.
And he's in some of the highest rated TV shows of all time. Like obviously he's a lead in Narcos. They've got The Mandalorian. He's also in a season of Game of Thrones as well. So he's a proven success when it comes to, being in an important role in television. But Bella Ramsey is basically a no-name actress.
Yeah. I think her first role might have been in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Which, HBO as well, that kind of taking from what you know. But she had a very relatively small role as Lyanna Mormont, wasn't it? In Game of Thrones, yeah. She did okay in that. She was decent for that role.
She was quite loved by fans, I will say, but the reaction from her casting decision as Ellie was met with quite a fair bit of criticism. She copped a lot of hate, which is definitely unfair when the show hasn't even come out, right?
You can't even judge anything it's literally judging it based on how she looks.
I think it's because, exactly, one of the main problems is she doesn't look like Ellie. There's, I guess, a slight similarity, but if you're casting on appearance, she wouldn't be the first person to come to mind, right?
Well, that's the same thing with Joel, though.
That's true, but Pedro looks gruff enough, right?
The general vibe and the
it's less about looking the part. It's more about just the vibe you get from them, and especially based on the character she plays in Game of Thrones. She didn't scream Ellie to me, and the casting of Ellie is the most important decision of the entire show. Ellie is the heart and soul of the show. You fuck up her casting, the show's over. It's done. So that was my major concern. Another one was only being 9 episodes long. So if I had to theorize beforehand, how many episodes would I think the first game would need, I'd say at the lowest end 10, and probably up to about 14 would be a nice number, right?
That's not really it though these days. How many shows have you seen recently that do 14 episodes, especially from HBO?
Yeah, well, HBO is very big on their 10 episode seasons.
Which is weird that they did 9.
To not even get 10 was rather shocking to me. And I had concerns heading in that 9 episodes would not be enough to cover the show with the care that it needs. Another concern I had was are they going to go too far down the fan service route? Are they just going to hey, remember this from the game over and over and over again, and kind of muck up the actual execution of telling this story? We've seen that in Game of Thrones season 7 and 8, where it seemed that they were just kind of doing things that the fans wanted rather than actually trying to execute a well-told story.
We've seen examples of fan service as well in bigger productions. Star Wars is a good example of that. They pretty much thrive off doing, hey, remember this from the 70s and shit like that. But we've also seen it done really well in some shows. For example, Cobra Kai does it really well.
Yeah, and being a big video game adaptation, I was a bit worried that they could head down that route in terms of also adhering to spectacle more so than the characters.
Yeah, especially with that budget.
Yeah, focusing more on the action sequences that, they're great, but really the heart and soul is the relationship between Joel and Ellie, and that's where the focus needs to be. So I was concerned about that, and also just adhering to a lot of the mainstream conventions that are happening in TV at the moment. Forced comedy is a very big thing in a lot of mainstream stuff, films as well, and it just wouldn't work for a show like this if you force it too much. And dialing down the violence was another big concern that I had, because
it's a fucking violent game.
Yeah, The Last of Us is incredibly violent, and if you dumb that down and you take it away, I'm gonna have problems with that, because I do love my violence.
Yeah, that's fair.
I also had concerns about the budget restrictions, even though, I mentioned before, this is a incredibly big budget for a television show, but they are adapting a video game set in a post-apocalyptic world, right? You need a big budget for that.
Yeah.
And were they gonna have to make major sacrifices with the budget that they had, and in turn sacrifice some of those excellent moments that we got from the games?
talking about that like adaptation, you know, like when it is from a book, you can pretty much create the look of it any way you want.
Yeah.
But when you've got the game, like a piece of visual media that's been out before, you have that aesthetic and that visual look already decided.
Yeah.
Like you can change it slightly, but if you do too much, it's going to fuck it up. It's going to be noticeable to the fans. It's going to look shit. It's going to feel like you're doing the wrong thing and people are going to notice it just from the general way it looks. So making sure that they use that money to create that world and make it look how it feels in the game is probably one of the most important parts.
And I think actually The Mandalorian is a decent kind of comparison. If they did something like they did with The Mandalorian with those kind of like backdrops that they use with the CG.
Oh, the volume.
Yeah, absolutely wouldn't work for this. They had to use a lot more practical effects than they would for, say, something like that. And one final concern that I had heading in as well was Neil Druckmann made a crazy big change of character for Joel between the first and second game. And I think I speak for 99% of fans when they say that they really love Joel from the first game, but some of the decisions that I made around his character in the second game contradict a lot of what was set up in the first game. And being an adaptation of the first game where we're not too sure what changes we'll get, I did have some slight concerns that maybe Neil Druckmann will renege on like his original interpretation of Joel's character and maybe go for something that's going to be more aligned to what his character is like in the second game. And I do think it ends up going down that route a little bit, but by no means does it ruin Joel's character entirely.
I think it's a bit of a blend.
I agree. But let's talk about the casting. So we touched on it with Bella. Part of me was very disappointed that the actress Sadie Sink, who plays Max from Stranger Things, the redhead girl, I think that was the perfect casting decision out of everyone that I'm aware of that kind of fits the look and age demographic to play Ellie. She ticked all of the boxes for me. I'm not a fan of Stranger Things. I think the TV show is pretty mediocre beyond season 1. And Sadie Sink, who's in, I believe, season 3 and 4, she is the best actress of the children by far. Her performance in season 4 is fucking incredible. I wasn't a fan of season 4, but her performance absolutely carries like every scene she's in. She shows so much vulnerability and emotional weight in these big moments as well. She's an incredibly talented actress. I think she's got a huge career ahead of her, and I can't help but think that she would have made a better Ellie than Bella. That's not to say that Bella was bad. I think Bella was good. I don't think she was great. I don't think she killed the role, right? She didn't like nail it, but she was serviceable. But I think someone like Sadie Sink maybe could have brought more to the role.
My opinion is a little bit different. I initially was not super excited about Bella Ramsey playing the character because she is almost unknown.
Yep.
And her performance in Game of Thrones wasn't super memorable. Like I didn't love Lyanna Mormont. I didn't care too much. First episode comes out. I thought she was fine. Yep. She was fine. As the show went on, you kind of got to see her own take on the character, and I really learned to appreciate Bella Ramsey's performance as TV Ellie, as show Ellie. In her own way.
She absolutely got better as the series got along, whether that be us getting used to her more or like her just, because I do think they show it reasonably chronologically. I think maybe she just grew into the role a little bit more. I do have slight concerns that we won't really touch on too much, but I do have slight concerns about her playing The Last of Us 2 Ellie in season 2. Because I think she fits the first game's Ellie a lot better than I can see her as the second game's Ellie.
So she's 19 right now, right? Like Bella Ramsey, the actress.
Correct.
And she's playing like the 14-year-old Ellie, and she looks 14. She looks even a bit younger than that.
She looks passable for that,
They're going to start filming season 2 within the next year or so. She is not going to look like 19-year-old Ellie at all.
No. I think there's things that they can do about it, but she kind of has like a baby face.
Yeah.
Whereas someone like Sadie Sink, right, she plays like, I think like a 14, 15-year-old kid in Stranger Things, right? And she's also, I think, the same age as Bella, or maybe 1 year older. And I've seen her like at premieres and stuff, and she looks significantly older than she does in Stranger Things TV show. So I think she's someone that actually fits both The Last of Us 1 and 2 in terms of appearance a lot better than, say, Bella Ramsey does.
Yeah, she's 20. And she looks like even younger there.
Yeah.
And I think they could probably dress her up to like look older when it comes to that second role. But she wasn't cast, so you know,
look,
we have to deal with that.
Exactly. It's just wishful thinking on my part. I think a lot of people too like had that same kind of train of thought as well. But Bella by no means does a bad job. But let's move on to Joel.
Yeah.
Because Pedro is a casting decision that like no one really argued too much about.
Because they like Pedro.
Yeah, like Pedro is a super charismatic and well-beloved actor. I think the decision to cast him or cast Joel in general isn't overly important. That might be a hot take, but I can think of like 50 actors off the top of my head that could pull off Joel. Mm-hmm. He's a pretty easy character to play in terms of what we have out there in terms of like male actors who can play that kind of gruff,
protective father, kind of like older.
Yeah, exactly. And look, like
who plays the Mandalorian?
Even like Keanu Reeves or someone like that could really pull him off. Like,
bro, no, come on.
But I think there's quite a few actors that could pull off Joel. But honestly, I wanted Troy Baker to do it. I'm a huge Troy Baker fan. Like, I've experienced a number of his performances in a variety of different video games over the years. And look, him playing Joel in the TV show isn't that big of a stretch because, first of all, he did all of the motion cap in the game. Mm-hmm. So his facial expressions are the facial expressions in the game. There's no difference between acting in a TV show and acting in motion capture when you're playing like the same character. He would deliver the same quality of performance, undoubtedly. The only issue you really have is in terms of appearance. Now, I think you can absolutely dress Troy Baker up. Like, you dye his beard a little bit, get him a bit gruff, and age him up a little bit. He can look like Joel. He maybe doesn't have like that big body figure. He's a bit kind of like
that's
skinny.
The main thing, I think, for me. He's quite a skinny dude.
Look, you know? Brendan Fraser couldn't wear a fat suit. He can wear a chest suit. In terms of appearance, that's the only thing really stopping him. But seeing him like play a different character in the game, I really wanted to see him. Have you ever seen the live performance of The Last of Us?
Like the mo capture?
No, like the staged play that they did for the...
No, I didn't even know they did that.
Yeah, so they did a script read-through for the release on PS4. Basically, it's just like a script read-through, but they're performing it with no scripts, right? They're performing it in front of a live audience. And Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson fucking kill it. Like, they're incredible. And this is like a play performance of the game, right? Like certain important scenes of the game. And they do such an incredible job that I understand like Ashley Johnson just could not play Ellie. She does not look the part. She's too old. But Troy Baker could have, and he would have been my dream. Like, if I was picking the cast, he'd be my Joel. But I understand why they didn't go that route, and it's simply because they needed a big name actor attached to this show. Like, less people would watch if it's fucking Troy Baker, because no one knows except for gamers who Troy Baker is.
True.
But you get a name like Pedro Pascal, and you're getting like a big bulk of your audience sitting down immediately just from his name.
And it kind of worked for them too.
Yeah.
You know, like people came in to watch the show that have never heard of the game before, which is kind of wild. Just because Pedro was a part of it. I don't think Troy Baker should have been cast. He's a fantastic Joel in the games. He's amazing. He did the motion capture. He does the voice. He's got Joel down. You know, he brought so much to that character in the games. I do not think that, you know, they should be using the game actors in these titular roles. I think they were really trying to do something different. And they made different choices in the story of the game.
Yep.
In the story of the show that they did in the game, you know, to kind of like differentiate it from what it was, the source material. And I think a part of that was casting new people to be these characters and put them in the roles. I don't know if Pedro was the right choice because, like you said, he's popular right now. You know, he's the household name. Everyone knows Pedro. He was at the Oscars. He's doing a lot of different shit. I think he was good. I really think he was good as Joel. I think it's not a difficult role to play, but what he brought to it in certain moments and looks and gestures and line deliveries was a different take, and it was really good.
Yeah.
I think he did a really standout job, and I think Joel, like Pedro as Joel, I couldn't imagine the show a different way now.
No, that's totally fair. I think Pedro was really good as well. No issues with his performance whatsoever. But like I said with Ashley Johnson's performance, Troy Baker's performance as Joel's perfection. You can't beat perfection, so why not just replicate it? That's my opinion. Alright, so let's get into episode 1. So the most important episode of any TV show is the pilot, is the first episode. And I think The Last of Us kicks things off with a really strong episode 1.
Me too. I thought episode 1 was one of the best episodes of the season. Like, it did a really good job.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I really like the start too with the kind of flashbacks talking about this new kind of fungus, talking about the cordyceps. Well, like years and years before the outbreak happened. I thought that was an incredibly unique thing that's very different from the game. It brings so much world building.
Oh, that 60s TV show.
Yeah. Well, I think there's 2 back to back, right?
Yeah.
And I found that incredibly interesting. Like, it's a great way to introduce the cordyceps fungi to the audience, and it's something that's very different from the games. You know, we don't get any of that. I think that was an incredible decision. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
It was haunting. It was a very chilling scene. And I think something that was really cool about that scene was you got to see the audience reception to that in the 60s. What they thought about, is that going to be a real thing? It kind of mirrored the real life expectations of people freaking out about the COVID pandemic.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great opening because like these kinds of conversations are happening right now about things that will eventually happen in the future. Like there will be future pandemics again. We just had one. And I just think it's an incredibly creative way to kind of kick things off for the show. And I was a big fan of it. I actually wish that they continued that format for every episode, not just the first couple.
What, the cold opens? Like the...
Yeah, like the flashbacks format. You know, like we start in the very kind of inception of them discovering this thing, and we could have got like bits and pieces of like whether it be the outbreak happening or maybe like different kind of countries and the way they try and handle it, like seeing some flashbacks of like the American president launching nukes on a major city and making that decision. Like bits and pieces like that to start every episode could have been really cool if they continued it.
Do you think that scene in the first episode was perhaps a bit expository?
Oh, it's expository, but it needs to be because the game's audience obviously is aware of cordyceps. They've seen, you know, they've played the games and they would have looked up like YouTube stuff and they know it's a real thing, but a normal television audience, like, they need to know that this thing is like real because it adds to the kind of realism of the TV show.
Fair.
And then we move into the actual start with the introduction of Joel and his daughter Sarah. And one thing I really liked about the entire show as a whole, but in particular, like I think episode 1 probably does it the best, is just how willing they were to copy scenes almost verbatim, right? Like word for word from the game. They weren't afraid to do that because I was really intrigued heading in to see like, okay, are they going to make changes for the sake of being different? If something works from the games, are they just going to copy it? And they copied it, and I think that was a fantastic decision.
It wasn't just copying it though. What they like kind of set up in this episode and what they continue to do throughout the whole season is they really expanded upon moments that happened within the game.
Yep.
So they had those bits that you're familiar with and almost was verbatim exactly what it is, you know, kind of recreated with these new actors playing these characters. But every one of those scenes was backed up with some kind of context or backstory of an extended scene previously or an extended scene afterwards or in between that to kind of give a bit more and add to it. And every one of those scenes, almost every one of those scenes, really hits. It really works for it. The first episode kind of starts a bit earlier than the game does.
Yep.
You know, you kind of jump straight into the action with the game. You know, this starts almost like 24 hours earlier in the show. You get to see the relationship between Joel and Sarah and how that kind of develops and how they act. And it gives so much to the characters. It develops them so much more before we get up to the eventual part that we get to when we start the game.
Yeah, well, in the game, you get like 5 minutes with Joel before the outbreak kicks off, whereas in the TV show, we get a fair bit more time with him. My only argument is I wish we actually got more time.
With Joel?
Yeah, so actually, the pilot was meant to end. We have, obviously, that big moment with Sarah's death, and then we cut to the future we see the kid walk into the quarantine zone and they find out he's infected, and then they give him a needle, he dies, and then it was meant to end on Joel throwing like the body into the fire.
Really?
And HBO thought that was too bleak of an ending to have for your first episode. Like, would people want to return to the show after such a downer ending like that? And also they wanted Ellie to be introduced in the pilot episode. Now, if you were to sit down 100 television screenplay writers and ask them, like, what is the correct decision when adapting The Last of Us? Should Ellie be introduced in the pilot episode? Like 99 of those 100 will say yes, Ellie needs to be introduced in the pilot episode. But in saying that, I actually think that the original conception of having the pilot basically split into 2, where you have part 1 of the pilot being before the outbreak and then ending with Sarah's death right towards the end, and then if you want to have like a bit of a teaser 20 years on to lead into the next episode, I think that was the better decision in terms of structure. But the correct decision ultimately is like, you have to get to Ellie as quickly as possible. And that's the first major issue I think the showrunners kind of came across when adapting the game, is realistically this episode either needed to be longer or needed to be 2 parts. Because I think I would have loved even more time in the past before the outbreak. And I think we definitely needed more time post 20-year time skip before the discovery of Ellie being infected.
Can I say I disagree?
Yeah, you can disagree what you want.
So that's cool. I think what you've said about like where it possibly could have ended, it would have been a really cool moment to end it, but yeah, it would have been the wrong decision. Because like you said, like them appealing to these two types of audience, you know, you've got the gamers and then you've got the people who are coming to watch the show for the first time. You said it before earlier, Ellie is the heart and soul of the show and the game.
Yep.
If they don't introduce Ellie in the first episode, they've lost a significant viewership, I think, and it would have been a mistake for them not to. So it is important to set that up. I do think thematically it would have been really cool if they ended it with the time skip and then Joel burning that kid's body.
Yep.
Cool moment to end on for an episode. I think that's a great idea, but realistically it doesn't set up enough. We don't meet Tess by that point. We don't meet Ellie. We don't meet Marlene. We aren't introduced to any of the current plot points that make sense for the rest of the episode. So yeah, it could have ended there, but I'm glad it didn't.
It's one of those tricky things where, like, objectively, the original ending that they had planned, that the showrunners wanted to, with, like, ending on basically Sarah's death, that's objectively, like, better, but it's also objectively worse in regards to the TV show format. So I think they really only had, like, a few options. One is the way they did it, which is what HBO wanted. They overrode the showrunners, and the showrunners actually admitted that, no, this was the right decision. They could actually do the 2-part pilot, right, which I think would hurt viewership tremendously, but make the story itself probably slightly stronger, because we get
2 episodes.
Yeah.
They would have done that anyway. You know, they would have released, if they had been told to separate that into 2 episodes,
it would have been 10. It was originally planned to be 10 episodes.
Yeah.
The reason why it's 9 is because the pilot was split
combined.
Into one.
Yeah. They would have released them both at the same time. We've seen that. They did that with Obi-Wan for Disney. You know, if they had chosen to do that, it would have been both episodes at once anyway, which would have had the same impact.
Yeah. I think part 1, part 2 would have worked, and probably would have been the decision I personally would have made, even though, like I said, like, if you get 100 screenwriters for television in a room, they'll tell you that's the wrong thing to do, but I'll still stand by it. I think it would have been better. Or I would have liked to have maybe seen an extra 10 to 15 minutes to help that pacing, because I really found the pacing post-time skip in the pilot episode to be terrible.
Like, it's a bit weird. I wouldn't say it's terrible, though.
Okay, terrible might be stretching it. I think the pacing of everything up till Sarah's death is fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. In fact, I wanted more time, right? But I understand, like, given the restraints they had to kind of speed run it a little bit. But I think that was incredible. After that moment, it's significantly worse than the first half. And that's where I kind of, like, see the pilot. It's basically got 2 halves to it. I think the first half is really, really strong. And I think the second half is just decent. It's just okay.
I think we spent just enough time in the past.
Yeah.
Right? So they really expanded upon...
Me wanting more time is just because I was enjoying it
because
so
you like
much.
that stuff. Yeah, exactly. So the most compelling parts of episode 1 to me was Sarah's point of view shit. I really fucking like Sarah in the first episode. She did amazing. She was a fantastic choice for Sarah. She brought a lot to the character, and I think she really expanded upon what we got to see of Sarah in the game.
Yep.
The things that she added to it and the individual scenes she had were just incredible on her own. I really, really wanted to see more of her, and I'm not mad that we didn't see more of Joel because of the time we got to spend with Sarah. Like, her at school, her noticing a few things that were off, her going to get the watch fixed was a scene that I kind of always wanted to see, and that was a really good scene too. One of the things the show does really well and sets up really good in the first episode is how they deal with tension. And there is so much tension, like, you can feel throughout the whole first episode that something's wrong, something's going on, and it's not explicitly stated at any point, but you feel it and you see it a lot. There's sirens and police cars going through all day. You get news about Jakarta on the radio. They hint at the wheat shit.
Just interject there, like the foreshadowing that they did with, like, the baked cookies and her not eating them was fantastic.
It's the pancakes.
Not having pancakes for breakfast.
The cake.
Yeah, not having a birthday cake. Like, really impressive foreshadowing. And the great payoff in, I think it's episode 3 where they actually mentioned that.
But yeah, that was really good. Really, like, subtly laid into it, and I didn't even notice it on my first watch through. Everything we got with Sarah was great, and I think that made her death even more impactful. Tommy, the stuff that we got to see with him as well was really good.
Would have liked more of it. Part of what I was saying before with, like, wanting more is I would have liked to have seen a tiny bit more Joel independent stuff in the pilot. I understand, yes, Sarah is the viewpoint character for the pilot, and maybe the right format is actually to use flashbacks in future episodes and not actually show it in the pilot. But I wanted to see Joel's perspective of going getting Tommy out of jail and then rushing back to get to Sarah in time and his experience of the outbreak, because he's essentially, like, the main character of the show, yet we don't really see barely anything from his perspective, right, in the pilot.
I think it's kind of a fake out. You know, they're like, here's Sarah, here's your main character. You know, even though we haven't put her in any promotional material, you know it's going to be about Joel and Ellie. Here she is, here's your main character, to kind of make the gut punch of her death a little bit stronger.
And speaking of like subtle changes as well, like I really like how I mentioned they weren't afraid to go verbatim with certain scenes and that, but they were also willing to make some subtle changes.
Like right when they're driving in the car, when that shit goes off, there's subtle things they do to like change up how the dialogue is. Some of it is word for word. It's verbatim exactly the same. Like they even have a shot, I think, where the police cars go past the highway sign. It is straight from the game.
It's great.
But one of the moments they do in the show that I really liked is when they get in the car, Sarah says like 1 or 2 words and then Joel and Tommy are immediately explaining things to her. It's really rapid fire. It's quick, good writing, and it kind of like shows Sarah at a higher maturity level than you feel like her character is aged. And it's like a really good moment. Like they're like, we're treating you as an adult, we're telling you exactly what's happening and what you need to know, trying to not get you to freak out, even though she is subtly freaking out.
And then we get to the big moment that like all gamers were waiting for. I have a question. Did you cry during Sarah's death in the show?
I did, in the show, more so than I did in the game.
That is insanity.
That's what I think that you're going to be pissed off about. I actually think that the moment of Sarah's death in the show is done better than the game.
Hard disagree. Couldn't disagree more.
I thought
Explain
you were
yourself.
say that. I really liked it. So I watched these scenes back to back, right? Like
so did I,
Yeah,
me too.
just to compare them and exactly the same. I think that the show is done better because it's better visceral, raw performances all around from everyone. I think Sarah's performance in the game and in the show is quite similar, but I think the difference comes from Joel, Tommy, and the soldier.
Okay.
Right? So the soldier in the show, they do something a little bit different when it comes to him getting the orders from his like general when he sees Joel carrying Sarah. He does this thing where he delivers the same line. I think it's like yes sir or okay sir or something. The same line with a different tone 3 times. And it builds that tension that I was talking about before. You get him saying yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. And then he turns the gun on them and it's chilling. It gives me chills thinking about it and like that moment, and it made it more engaging for me. I think in the show it's just kind of like he turns on it and then Joel does this weird turn and gets shot like in the game. 15 in the game, like 15 times and then rolls to the ground. I think it looked more realistic and I think it was more tense and chilling in the show. And then Sarah's actual death, there are differences that happen in the show. In the game, it's more Joel kind of like accepting it and like freaking out and trying to stop it, but like ultimately realizing that Sarah had been shot, had been fatally wounded, and that she was going to die. In the show, Joel's denying it. Like he sees it and he's actively like trying to stop, like fix things right away. He's like, shit, you're hurt. He's like freaking out, but he's trying to like get her to hold it. He's trying to get her to stand up. He's trying to get her up. He's believing until the last very second that there is something he can do, that his baby girl isn't gone. And I think his performance is better. I think that Pedro Pascal, as Joel in this moment, he's way more emotional. He's believing till the last second, and it makes it kind of hurt more when she does eventually die. You see Tommy crying in the background, and that's a really good performance from Gabriel Luna. That moment where Joel screams out to Tommy, and he's like, "Tommy, help me!" You know, he's like trying
and he's just
really
standing
hard.
there.
It gives me chills. It gives me chills thinking about it. It made me cry way more than the game one did. Not saying that the game one didn't make me cry. Very emotional scene. Didn't expect it, obviously the first time seeing it. But I knew this was coming. Like, they obviously weren't going to change that. Hit me more. Pedro did a great job. Like, the whole scene, I think, was constructed better. So I liked it better in the show.
I don't disagree with anything you said, with the exception of liking it better. So I also had some tears. Well, like, even though I knew it was coming, I still think they fucking nailed it. I will say this, right? Of all the big major plot beats that are in the game as well as the show, this is the best execution of all of them in the entire series, right?
That's a hot take.
Yes, no, that is a hot take, right? But this is the best execution of it, and I still think it is worse than the games.
Wow.
And there's a couple of key reasons why. One, the thing that gets me every fucking time when I can just rewatch that scene from the game and I'll get emotional every single time without fail, right? And one key thing for me that gets me every single time is the wincing from Sarah. The squeals that she does when Joel's like trying to pick her up and holding her wound, and she does these little childlike squeals. They get me every fucking time. That's missing from the show, and I don't know why. They just, like, her performance is incredible, right? But I would have liked those squeals.
I think it's more real. I can hear the squeals in my head, you know, because I've rewatched that scene a little bit. I know what you're talking about. I think that the show Sarah does a realistic performance of that, doesn't overdo it to that extent. Not that I think it would be overdoing it after you've been shot in the stomach unexpectedly, but I still think that the performance she gives is very similar to Game Sarah, and I think she does do noises that kind of replicate that.
She more so just like focuses on her breathing with her performance, right?
Yeah.
Like her panicked breathing and then the slowing down, and her performance is fantastic. I just think those squeals were like the final straw for me that made me break every single time in the game, and they were missing in the show. But I will say it's probably more befitting of a character because Sarah in the game is a bit more like immature than the TV show version.
Yeah.
And the second problem I have, well, not problem, but just slight difference, because like I said, this is my favorite execution in the TV show of a big moment, right? And that is, I disagree with Pedro's performance being better. I think that the "please no baby girl" line and the pleadingness that we get from Troy Baker's performance, you could argue that Pedro's not saying as much is more impactful, and he's just really letting like his performance shine through without having to say these words. I think Troy Baker's fucking delivery of the dialogue right as Sarah's like passing away in his arms is perfection. And look, I don't think Pedro could have pulled it off, so I get that it's different and they omitted some of the dialogue.
Yeah.
But I still find it a lot more emotional when he's basically pleading. I think you're undercutting the game a little bit by saying that Pedro's performance is like significantly better. I think they're different.
They are different, and that's what I was talking about. You know, there's like different like stages of it.
I don't think Pedro's Joel is more desperate to save Sarah than Troy Baker's Joel.
I think it's different realizations of what's happening. You know, like
they're slightly different takes, right?
Yeah. It's like exactly the same thing, but they've used two different takes as if it was a real thing.
Yeah.
You know, like as if it was a real production. The game was one take, the show was a different take. I just happen to prefer the performance in the show take compared to the game take. Not saying the game is bad. Like it's
for sure.
Like crazy emotional. I love it. I think it's a great performance. Troy Baker does an amazing job. I just the Pedro Pascal performance, the show performance, it got me more.
Okay.
I liked it more.
So it's more of like a personal thing, I guess.
Yeah. I know that you have a bit of a, like, you love the games, you've loved like them for more than I have.
Yeah.
So I knew that you kind of have a bit more preference towards the games, but I knew that this was a bit of a controversial opinion. I think people like...
I think a lot of people like agree that they did it justice.
Yeah, they definitely did it justice, and I think you agree with that too. I just think it was done better. I do.
Fair enough. I'm not going to argue too much more because we'll be here all day. But
let us know in the comments if you liked it.
But then we get that big time skip, right? And they actually make a few more changes. For example, right off the bat, I noticed like Joel's character to be quite different in terms of like his occupation. So in the game, he's like a smuggler, teams up with Tess, right? And they've got quite high notoriety. Whereas the first thing I think they kind of show in the TV show is he's willing to like take this fucking sewer job just for some money.
Well, he's doing body burning job first. Like that's what we see.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's what
and he's like, what pays the most? Like he'll do any fucking job.
That would be the one with the shit.
Yeah, I didn't like that change. It's not a big thing. It's such a tiny thing, and it doesn't even come up later on. But I kind of like the fact that like Joel in the game has a bit more notoriety, right? Yeah. He's got a bit more of a reputation. He's a bit above doing fucking sewer jobs, right?
Yeah. He's made that name for himself as that smuggler kind of character.
Yeah.
Makes him a bit cooler.
Absolutely. And that's one of the big changes actually throughout the entire series is they nerf Joel. They do. They take him from like being this video game badass that like, yeah, I believe that this guy has killed thousands of people, right? So when you're actually playing the games and murdering all of these people, his character is a bit more representative of that. Whereas in the TV show, they make him a lot more vulnerable and they nerf him. And in fact, they show him to be rather incompetent at times, a little bit too much, in my opinion. Sometimes.
Not so much in the first episode.
No, not in the first episode, but throughout the series, I just think they nerf Joel, they rein him back a bit and they introduce some elements, and it's like I was saying, like leading in, it's more befitting of what Joel's character is like in The Last of Us 2, the second game, rather than the first game, because in the first game he's very much like he does not fucking make mistakes. He's very, very intelligent with survival, but in the second game he isn't. In the TV show, like he has some slip ups and there's some elements to his character that make him, a little less badass in that regard.
They're trying to set him up, I think, because when they made the first game, obviously, they didn't know that they were going to make part 2, I don't believe. They didn't have that planned out.
No, they didn't, for sure.
Yeah. So now that it's come out, like this is a new adaptation of it, I think what they're trying to do is...
fix those mistakes?
Yeah.
Even though they weren't mistakes.
Not fix them, necessarily, but kind of prepare audience audiences.
So it's less jarring.
Exactly. So it's less of a freak out. There's less controversy about it. I think they did a decent job of doing that in this.
Less controversy. Good luck, HBO.
So Joel, they explain it, right? They explain why he's doing that because they change his motivations around slightly.
Yep.
In the show, he is after that battery so he can get that truck so he can go and save Tommy.
Yep.
That's his goal. The way the game starts is he's just in his apartment and Tess comes in and they're like, Robert jumped us. He's got our fucking guns. We have to go and get him. And it's kind of like less of a impactful motivation. There's less that we see of him in the game.
That's fair enough. And they do change that. Like they remove the whole Robert stuff pretty much entirely with the exception. Yeah, they have like Tess interact with him.
Yeah.
But like the reason why that stuff exists is it's like a video game tutorial.
Yeah.
You don't need that for the TV show. So removing it made total sense, right? It was completely unnecessary. I don't particularly love the stuff like with Joel early on. Like he took a bit more warming up for me to get to, and it was very quick. Like we got maybe 5 minutes of it and then we're off again, I do like Tess's introduction as well. Like, I think the casting of Tess, Anna Torv, who's also in Mindhunter, like perfect casting for Tess.
We love Mindhunter.
Yeah.
It's a great show.
And she's fantastic as Tess. Like
she is. She's really good.
She fits the look, that she's got that gruffness. And honestly, like seeing her in Mindhunter, I didn't really expect it. But no, she was great.
I was a bit skeptical about her at first. But as it kind of like that episode went along, she was really charismatic. I really clicked with her character.
Me too.
Like in that first episode with that early stuff with Joel, we do get to see him doing smuggler shit. Like, so he gives the pills to that guard.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't really like that scene at all.
I don't like the fact that they made him like a bit of a druggie either.
Well, that's a little bit later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Specifically
but him taking the pills himself. I don't know if I like that decision. Like, I get it.
And they kind of forget about it too.
Yeah, I understand. It's like, he needs the drugs to help forget the pain of his daughter.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It feels like a bit of a cliche.
Never comes up again.
Exactly.
Like you kind of set him up as a bit of an addict, and it's like, well, as soon as he's got Ellie, he's totally forgotten about like needing that. But that specific scene where he's giving the pills to
Ellie is his drug.
The specific scene where he's giving the pills to the guard kind of sucks. Like, it's like really antagonistic from both their angles, but also it kind of felt like an afterthought.
Some of the stuff just with Joel in general in episode 1, it's a bit clunky. I like the Tess stuff.
The Tess solo stuff, like with Robert, was really good.
Exactly. I agree completely. And the Ellie stuff as well, like maybe not the best introduction to our character that we could have got, but at least we get like her obvious personality traits conveyed pretty quickly.
I think it was too much.
You think?
Straight up.
Yeah.
I think that's where I really felt like Bella Ramsey was acting as Ellie.
It's her worst performance for the series, I think.
She was swearing every fucking second sentence, like every second word was a swear word. She seemed really arrogant and unlikable.
Yeah, no, I think that's
overdid
fair.
it.
I think that's fair. I found her stuff to be like decent. I wasn't overly impressed with it. But Joel should be like, his stuff should be the coolest, and it just wasn't really in the pilot. I can forgive that because they kind of speed run through it and they get to the gist of it, right? They've got to take Ellie to a Firefly base, and in return they get a car battery so they can go and try and rescue.
Well, no, Marlene promised a full truck and supplies and weapons and everything.
Yeah. So Joel's motivations are obvious, right? Like Tommy hasn't been replying. He's worried about his brother, and Tommy's a character we've been introduced to. And Tess, they really kind of actually set up like a bit more of a relationship between these two.
It feels way more romantic.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Like in the game, they're kind of just like fuck buddies that have been through it, and you know there's history there, but so much of it is left up to your imagination.
It's very ambiguous.
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
Whereas in the show, it's a bit more explicit. Like Joel mentioned that they've been together for the whole 20 years, right? Like since pretty much the beginning of the outbreak.
I think we see them in bed together, like not like doing anything, but like they're sharing a bed, which kind of implies a lot more.
Yeah.
And the general just kind of vibe and how they interact together is very more like personable.
Yeah, and I liked it. I liked that stuff.
Me too.
I wanted more of it.
Especially because I like this Tess quite a bit, like this take on her.
Agree 100%. But one thing I will say about the pilot, and look, it goes for the entire show for me, but there were some very slightly clunky performances with regards to comparing like the scene from the game to the show. I've got a few examples. So Joel and Sarah's first ever scene together. I don't think Pedro had that chemistry with Nico quite as much as they needed to. Like it wasn't problematic or anything, but like the first scene they shared together, the watch scene as well, it just felt slightly clunky compared to the game for me. But the one I have biggest issue with is the ending, the discovery of Ellie's infection.
Right.
I think the execution of that scene, look, I won't say terrible, but it was not good. It was significantly worse than the games, and I think the game's execution of it had room to improve. So the fact that they actually got worse really bothered me. What did you think of that final scene of the pilot?
I have to kind of agree with you here. I did kind of like it more in the game.
Yeah.
They really tried to do something by setting up that guard as being the like guard that we saw previously.
Yeah.
And I think they were really trying to hinge on that.
It works on paper.
Yeah.
Like Joel knowing this
It
guy
does.
and then fucking beating him is a bit more impactful than just some random faceless goon.
I have to say I like that.
Yeah.
I like
on
how-
paper.
The execution of it. I liked how Joel, that's the only thing I really liked about that scene was how Joel beat up the guard. You know, I felt like we had seen all of this in that episode. You know, we knew exactly what he was feeling. We've seen him struggle with that and his trauma and his PTSD. So him kind of flipping in that moment and beating the shit out of the guard, especially the guard who's been antagonistic to him before, is threatening him here and directly triggered him in this scene. I think it worked. I liked it. I kind of liked him losing his shit a little bit. You kind of felt for him there. Didn't like anything else leading up to that. Ellie's so mental outside the walls. She should have been caught like 16 times just them getting up to that point. I think the way that they are discovered walking up to the guard is very fucking careless.
Yeah.
Like in the first place, whereas in the game it's kind of like a bit more shocking.
And it's incredibly rushed too. Like the game, it's a whole fucking mission, right? Like trying to dodge. Yes, they're killing like lots of people along the way, but for the TV show Adaption, I think we needed like 10 more minutes with this kind of section because it needed to be like a real tense, can they get out of the city?
Yeah.
You know, sneaking past people and then they get caught at like the last step and we have it play out. They kind of speed ran through it, so it alleviated all of the tension. For me, it just didn't work, and there's a few reasons why. One thing I particularly hated was the flashback. So
in that moment.
Yeah, so flashbacks are a cardinal sin of any like filmmaker, right? You only should ever use I'm a flashback fan. I support flashbacks. I love them. In fact, as I suggested, I would have started every single episode
With a flashback.
Yeah. That's how much I love them.
I was going to say, you literally argued to have more flashbacks.
Yeah, no.
Just like 10 minutes ago.
I am pro flashback. So if I'm ever anti flashback, you know I've got a problem with it. Did we really need a flashback of Sarah dying when we saw it half an hour ago?
Well, that kind of adds to your point more of like it being that was a part of episode 2. You know, I kind of remember it. So they could have cut it.
We did not need it. It's so bad because all you need is one close up and a good performance by Pedro and we fucking get it.
Didn't mind it because it worked for what happened, but yeah, they could have not had it.
It took me out of the moment.
Wow,
like
okay.
I get what's happening. I understand that Joel is having PTSD. If a general audience member can't pick up that he's getting flashbacks of his daughter in this moment with the gun being pointed at him, being shot almost shot for shot the same way, if the audience member can't pick that up, they don't deserve the flashback.
They don't deserve to be watching the show.
It was completely unnecessary, and just the execution in general, like the acting is super poor by Bella.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, look, I'm not bit. Look, like compared to Ashley's performance in that same moment,
Way more desperate. You know?
Exactly.
Like, she's like, no, please, like, look, it's 3 weeks old, you know, like. It was not the same.
And Tess just being like, Joel, and then being okay with it, like, pretty much immediately. Like, I don't know. I found it incredibly clunky, and I think it was probably the worst moment of the pilot for me. It's a weak climax, especially compared to what could have been with Sarah's death as the climax.
The music shot of the radio playing right at the end of that episode with the 80s song, that was more of an interesting climax than the whole scene like prior to it, that whole like ending bit. They could have just had them leave the city. I literally thought the episode was going to end when they like got outside the walls and that music started playing. That's when I thought it was done. And then they went on and did that whole extra part. It wasn't necessary and it didn't land as well as the game.
I think the Joel kind of losing his shit so early was a bit of a fuck up as well. Like that's a moment you want to save for a bit later in the show. Right?
Like
Joel fucking snapping and violently killing someone should have been a moment that happens a little bit later when he actually cares about Ellie, rather than playing that card in the first episode, and then everything else that kind of happens with Joel feels like less than that, if that makes sense.
I get
so
you.
I personally think that Joel should have just ruthlessly fucking killed him, you know, like immediately in using his survival instincts and being on top of the situation. And I think both him and Tess should have ganged up on Ellie a bit more, and that's where the tension should have been, but they just didn't execute that at all.
Yeah.
But overall, look, I think the pilot is one of, like you said, it is one of the best episodes of season 1.
Yeah, it's strong. It's a strong start, despite the climax.
Yeah, for sure. I think the climax is my biggest issue. Like I said, there's some slight clunky chemistry problems, which is a bit of a problem for nearly every pilot of a TV show, right? Because they generally shoot these first, and that lack of chemistry and the clunkiness of some scenes is is evident even in some of like the best TV shows, right?
I gotta say, I think Pedro and Nico had more chemistry than I think you're giving them credit for. I think that they did quite well in a few areas, but
they did, but it wasn't consistent. Some
Right.
scenes are fantastic, but like the watch scene,
Yeah,
you,
I agree.
you watch the watch scene,
and the movie scene, yeah.
yeah, in the game compared to the TV show,
Yeah.
the game is significantly better, and the chemistry was just not quite there.
But I think the breakfast scene was obviously wasn't in the game, but it was good. Their chemistry was
yes,
good. There.
agree. I just found it a bit inconsistent.
Sure.
And I'll stand on the hill that I think it should have been 2 parts. Or either one really long episode. I think it was a little bit rushed. But overall, it was a really solid episode to kick the series off.
Yeah, agree.
Episode 2 hits us with another teaser, this time in Jakarta, and I fucking loved this scene.
It was awesome. It was
loved
super good. It was way less expository than the first episode was. It was way more show don't tell, especially since they were speaking Indonesian.
Yep. I'm so glad that they put like some foreign film kind of stuff in a mainstream TV show like that. Like they didn't have it in English. They actually stuck to it being in Indonesian.
That was something as well. I just want to really talk about the first episode just very quickly. That watch scene where they come in and they're talking in Arabic and they're freaking out and we don't get the subtitles for that at all.
Awesome.
Really good choice. That was awesome. But yeah, so it's in Indonesian, the entirety of it, and we get to see like this head scientist woman, like this really high up Indonesian scientist, eating her lunch, not wheat again, luckily for her. Glad all these people are getting the memo before it was a thing. They come and collect her and you're like, what the fuck's happening? They take her in and they show you this fucked up body. Like patient zero pretty much. They explain everything that's happening, like kind of how the outbreak began. And her reaction is insane.
Yep.
It was so well done.
Yep.
They're like she freaks out in the medical room. They go out and they have the meeting and she's like, what would you do?
She gets asked for her opinion and her advice is to bomb the city to stop it from spreading.
And you can see that it's cutting her up to say that.
Yep.
But she knows that it's fucked. Like that thing in the first episode that was set up by those scientists, like this is their worst fear for her specific region, like of what she studies. And she knows that this is the worst outcome possible. And despite her family being there, despite knowing what it means for the world, she's like, we gotta fucking bomb us all.
Yep.
Try and save what's left.
Off the top of my head, I think this opening, like the opening of episode 2, is my single favorite addition from the television show.
It's good.
I really loved it. It gives so much of an insight to like the outbreak. We get a completely different perspective in a new country as well, and we see like an expert in the field and their reaction to it, and it links beautifully to the themes of the game. Like we get her saying like you need to bomb the city, right? And then how she wants to spend her final moments with her family. Like it's a really nice thematic link to the heart and soul of the show, while giving us a really fresh perspective. And I love the world building elements. Like this is just something that you can't get from the game that the TV show can provide. And I loved it. I really, really, really wish they continued this format for the future episodes, you know, because at least until like that time skip in the middle, right?
I think you would have gotten sick of it a little bit, like I think the audience would have gotten a bit tired of seeing that kind of stuff, but I do understand that their idea of doing those cold opens with those different moments, like the president of a different country having to say like, yes, we have to bomb everyone.
Or even just like Joel's perspective post Sarah's death, or stuff that like is left up to the imagination. Just seeing some of it, or even like when he meets Tess for the first time, or maybe
would have loved that.
Yeah, or maybe like Tess having to kill her family, which is a part of her backstory. I would have loved to have seen that. Like, yes, I guess it's alluded to, and you don't want to show too much because some of it still should be up to the imagination. But the game is so ambiguous in that regard. The TV show could have expanded on that.
And it's something the TV show did a lot. They really did expand on certain moments. They could have done more. Yeah,
and I think too, like those cold opens were both fantastic. So who's to say like future ones wouldn't have been also fantastic? Their choice to remove the airborne spores, I got no issue with that whatsoever.
Yeah, it's fine.
Like
it's visually a little bit.
It's difficult to pull off in a TV show.
Yeah.
In the game, it works because it's a gameplay element. And it's, a lot easier to convey that kind of like information in the game with the spores and these gas clouds and whatever. In a TV show, it's a bit harder, and they didn't need it. So I've got no issue with that change. And then they also add in like this fact that the infected don't like the sun, which never really comes up again, but makes a bit more sense why they're a bit more prevalent at night, I guess. And then also how they're connected through these like roots in the ground, which is more realistic, akin to like the actual cordyceps fungi.
Yeah, like how the fungus like actually interacts with each other.
Would have been cool if they didn't completely forget about that for the whole rest of the series.
It did come up in that episode though, so it's a very self-contained little tidbit that is forgotten about. Yeah.
True, yeah. Look, it's kind of dumb that they set something up and then they forget about it. I'm not the biggest fan of like what that actually means. Like, it's cool. Maybe they could have done some cool things with it, but the fact that they didn't know what to do with it and just chose to ignore it, to me just suggests that maybe they shouldn't have bothered including it at all, because we spend like a whole like 5-minute scene about them talking about it, and then it happens in this episode and then never happens again.
Never again. Yeah, it's not even a problem. Not even something they can
barely an inconvenience. But I do really like this episode too. Like,
yeah, me too.
I think it is one of the best examples of how it replicates the gameplay of Last of Us, right? The way they showed that when they go into that like museum or whatever, the way they navigate everything out and they have their flashlights.
It feels like you're playing the game.
Exactly. It felt like I was playing the game, and that action sequence with the clickers, brilliant.
This is one of the best examples of tension I have seen in live action media in like a while. This entire, like, the whole sequence in the museum, incredibly fucking tense.
Yeah.
I'm holding my breath. I'm pissing, I'm shitting. I'm so scared the whole time.
I was coming.
Going on. I genuinely felt like so anxious while they were exploring it. They did a really good job of making the clickers fucking scary.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
They looked incredible.
They nailed it.
The production design on these costumes of making the infected look fucked up, amazing.
They did the clickers justice, because in the game, they are such a fucking cunt.
Yeah.
And in the show, they even cunted them up more.
Yeah, they buffed the clickers.
Yeah, they nerfed Joel and buffed the clickers.
Which makes for a fun episode too. No, it was really good. It was such a tense scene. I really enjoyed the way it was crafted, the difficulties that they kind of went through.
They didn't go over the top either by having like 50 of them, right? I think there was like 2.
Yeah, there's such a temptation there. I think there was 3. There's such a temptation for them to be like, oh, we've got a bigger budget, we can do whatever we want. Here's 50 clickers in a room, you know, you got to get through it. Like, it's bigger than the game. And they really kept it grounded.
Yeah, and they showed that even Joel and Tess, like 2 survivors who are surviving in this world for 20 years, they're terrified of the clickers.
Yeah.
And Joel, like, when he shoots them, like, they're fucking armored. It did nothing, right? They're so incredibly hard to kill.
They see their reactions too.
Yeah, they established the clickers as a massive threat, and it's the first time Ellie sees them, and it's the first time as the audience who haven't played the games, obviously, gets to see them. And I think it was really, really well executed.
Me too. Really does justice for the games, like you were saying. Like, it felt like gameplay, it looked like gameplay, and it was as scary as the gameplay.
Yeah, and another thing I like too is they show afterwards that Ellie got bit a second time. It wasn't necessary, like they could have not included this and it would have been completely the same. But I think the fact that she gets bit a second time is more so for the audience's sake, to just show like, oh, this wasn't like a fake bite or wasn't like a dog bite or anything like that. Like,
just so you know she's immune.
Yeah. I think that reminder like didn't hurt whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it made sense, you know, like for 2 of the 3 of them to come out of that situation and get bit, which is a death sentence normally, unless you're Ellie, right?
Yeah.
It's a death sentence. It just shows how dangerous these, you know, clickers are.
More realistic, you know. Comparing it to other like zombie shows, like something like The Walking Dead, you know, where people like literally walk through it with a little bit of blood on them and no one gets bit if you're a main character. It was incredible to see that realism in that moment for 2 of our...
Brilliant sound design, brilliant costume design with the clickers, bringing them to life.
Loved it.
Really good stuff.
Genuinely one of my favourite moments in the whole show.
Speaking of genuinely favourite moments, well, this wasn't one of mine. So let's talk about Tessa's death.
Yeah.
So I really like the changes they made, obviously having gone there and defined that the Fireflies had all been, you know, killed by infected. That was a realistic change that makes a lot of sense. Like in the game, it's a bit different because you need those combat sections, right? We don't need it in the TV show. So I like the changes that they made, how they come there and they discover that they've all been wiped out. Good stuff. The tension around Tess with her bite and what that means for her and how it basically 180s her character, right? Like she's fucking desperate for some kind of hope and she starts believing in the Ellie stuff kind of out of nowhere.
Before she even sees that evidence.
Yeah. And after being bit herself, because she needs this to mean something, because her life is about to end. She needs this to mean something, right?
Yep.
Especially with her backstory, which I wish was alluded to a little bit more in the TV shows.
I don't think I even noticed it in the show.
Yeah, no, I'm not too sure if it's incorporated all that much, but just as a fan of the game, I know that Tessa's backstory, like she had to kill her whole family because they were infected, and it's a super fucked up thing, right? And she's kind of in the same boat as Joel, right? She's basically a female Joel. She's in the same boat, but she's a bit more of an optimist than Joel. And then when she gets bitten, her character changes from this more pessimistic side, gruff, grunt kind of character, to, no, she needs this to mean something for her, the sake of her life, because she's going to die. She needs her death to mean something.
Yeah.
And I think that's fantastic. I really like the symbolism of, the light representing hope, right? The flame of the light are representing hope, and how she's yeah, exactly. She's flicking the light over and over and over again, but she doesn't fucking give up, because she still has hope even in her final moments. And then when she finally flicks the lighter, that shows that yes, her hope is still there, and her sacrificing herself in that moment, was big for her character.
Yeah.
Got no issues with any of that. The infected change, good. Her sacrificing herself to buy
me too. I really liked all of that.
Joel and Ellie time, loved all of it. The one big problem I had, though...
Don't say it.
I'm going to say it. Two things, actually. One, I think emotionally the scene fell flat. We compare it to the pilot with Sarah's death. They nailed it, right?
Yeah.
They hit the emotional beats that they needed to. They evoked an emotional response from me. Tess is a character I care about, and I don't know whether it was just because it was maybe too rushed in the show. We didn't quite spend enough time with her. I wasn't emotionally impacted by her death at all.
Okay.
It had no emotional impact on me whatsoever, and I think in the game it had a significantly bigger impact, even though it shouldn't have, because the TV show actually does a bit more with Tess's character.
They give you a bit more to development with her, and you spend a bit more time with her than the game.
And the actress is great. All of these boxes are ticked, yet at the end of this episode, I'm kind of like, okay, I don't really feel much about it. And I think one of the problems with that comes from the big controversial decision with having an infected walk up to Tess and basically kiss her.
Right. I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to mention it.
Completely unnecessary, and I hated it. Couldn't stand it.
I didn't hate it. It was fine. Like, they've established this new thing with the fucking infected in the show. They've got these horrible, weird, tentacle things coming out of their mouth.
Yeah.
I don't think that was a part of the game. I don't remember seeing that.
No, it wasn't.
So it's something new. It's a cool visual thing they can represent in the show as well, to show that these people are creepy and infected. It's a gross idea to have one of them walk up to Tess and literally be violating her with this weird tentacle thing. This is potentially how they, in their own minds, part of them being controlled by the fungus is still trying to relegate what they do as humans in those bodies. So it's something that they are kind of driven and drawn to do. And it was a visually striking kind of moment. I think it looked very visually gross and invoked that kind of emotion. Was it necessary? No.
I get it, but I didn't like it.
Alright, that's fine.
I would have rathered to see her get torn to pieces and her still flicking the lighter while she's getting torn to pieces.
Yeah, then have that kind of gross little kissy bit.
Didn't like it at all. And plus, they kind of insinuate that the infected saw her as one of them, because they basically ignore her. But one of them doesn't, and then walks up. And I get what they're going for. I understand they're trying to incorporate this, this is how the fungus needs to reproduce, right? But it's something that, again, doesn't come up later, and it was just completely unnecessary.
Yeah,
I didn't like the change.
Another one macking on anyone else.
And Tess was the wrong character for it to happen to as well. If this happened to Kathleen or someone like that, I might have been a little bit more on board. But to happen to a character that's such a badass like Tess, a character that I care about, I feel like it kind of undermined parts of that for me.
Could you imagine if it happened to fucking Perry or something?
But
no, I think Tess's death was more emotional in the game. I do agree with you there.
Yep.
But I don't think it was completely off. I did like the moment.
Were you really emotional when it happened though?
In the show?
Yeah.
No, not as much.
Would you have liked to have been?
Yeah, I would have liked more.
That's my problem.
I liked it. I liked Tess a lot in the show, quite a bit. Probably more than I did in the game, potentially, just because we got more development with her.
Yeah.
And I really do like her actress. I think she's fantastic.
Yep.
I did like the moment of her death. Think it could have been more. But I think it was really overshadowed by the tension and the anxiety that builds up in the scenes just before it to come to that kind of emotional ending, and it's not as impactful as it should be.
Agreed.
So I do kind of agree with you there, but I don't think it was quite as bad as you're making it out. Quite as not at all emotional.
Yeah, well, to preface this, I am nitpicking here because the game is one of my favorite things ever. And when you're passionate about something, you're going to nitpick. You're going to be passionate about what you're watching. And so heading into this show, it's going to have to do an incredible job to please me. And for the most part, it does, especially in these first 2 episodes. I think I think these 2 episodes are very, very overrated. People were fucking losing their minds when this came out, saying it's the best show ever after 1 episode. They were good episodes, don't get me wrong. But Episode 3 is where maybe some of that opinion started to shift.
Right.
Episode 3 is the first big controversial moment / episode that we get of the entire series.
Yeah.
This is where we get the biggest deviation from the source material. They take a character in Bill, who is a reasonably major character in the show, and basically change his entire story arc. So for those of you who aren't aware, in the game, Bill is a character that Joel and Ellie run into, and he's basically this like crazed survivor that's got these traps everywhere in his fucking town, and Joel talks about him like, yeah, he's fucking crazy, he's survivalist, right? When they run into them, like Ellie and Bill have a crazy amount of banter. They do not get along one bit. There's some awesome action sequences. I understand why they had to maybe like remove that. Basically, they changed that and instead give us a love story that's talking of flashbacks is essentially one big giant long flashback.
It's a major deviation episode.
Yeah, we get like almost a feature length episode on a minor character from the game with maybe 10 to 20 minutes with Joel and Ellie.
Yeah. At the end and a small flashback in the middle with Joel and Tess. Majority of it is completely spent with characters that we haven't seen in the show prior to this episode.
Yep.
For new viewers, they wouldn't even understand the nuances of Bill or Frank and their whole kind of relationship.
Let me preface this before I go in on this episode. So, like, tons of people out there bombed this episode because there's a gay relationship taking place, right? And that's the only reason they did it. My issues with this episode, I could care less about that. The issues for me come from we spend the longest episode of the entire series, an entire episode on two minor characters that aren't important to the story, that don't move the plot forward whatsoever, bar Ellie and Joel finding a car battery, which literally could have been done in like 2 minutes. You know, they could have just randomly come across this car, they started up, holy shit, it's working, boom, whole episode finished, right? I have no issue with this episode, like a whole big flashback episode, giving us so much more depth and layers to a character from the video game. Got no issue with it if this was like a 12 or 15 or 20 episode season. This is a 9 episode season and you're dedicating 90 minutes of runtime to basically have Joel and Ellie go from not having a car to having a car, and that's about all the development we get.
I don't mind.
You don't mind?
You know, like, yes, it's a massive deviation episode. You know, it's got basically nothing to do with everything that's been set up in the show so far and has very little impact for what happens, you know, going forward.
So why include it?
Because it's fucking awesome. It's genuinely just a well-written, well-constructed, beautifully shot episode. While it might not be necessary, it's taking the smallest thing from the game and expanding upon it in a crazy, crazy way, and it shows such an interesting level of creativity. You know, they could have included it as an extra episode or something else. It didn't need to take away from the whole thing. You're right, it doesn't have an impact on Joel all that much, except for when you think about he just lost Tess. You know, they met Bill and Frank together when they were like, Tess kind of brought him into this whole kind of thing, so they were connected in this whole kind of world. And there's that moment at the end with that letter.
It's a really good moment.
Yeah.
Whereas, look after Tess for me, and we've just lost Tess.
It kind of makes the whole thing pay off. But can you really tell me that you didn't think this episode was engaging and good, well crafted episode?
I agree with everything you said. I think this episode is really well made.
Yeah.
But when watching this, I was like, oh no, because I knew at the end of this episode that they had just fucked the series. Because pacing wise, with what was still yet to come in the games and the number of episodes we had left, they didn't match. I loved this episode, right, as a standalone thing.
Yeah.
If this season was 14 episodes long. Right. But because they did this, it's absolutely okay to jump on the hype train and say this episode was great. Like, some people are calling this the greatest episode of television ever made.
I don't think it's the greatest episode of television ever made.
Look, I wouldn't go that far, but it's a good, well made, like you said, brilliantly written, great performances. Got no issue with any of that. But by having this episode, you're detracting from the heart and soul of the show. You're giving me 90 less minutes than I should have got with Ellie and Joel's relationship.
Right.
And that shows in the final 2 episodes of the series, which we'll get to later, but I've got no issue with having like a standalone kind of episode like this. I quite like them, in fact, but not for a 9 episode season.
So you're saying that the reason you dislike this episode is because it detracts far too much from a short series.
If this was a standalone episode,
like an extra, like a DLC episode,
like Euphoria has done in the past with a Christmas special and another episode that was completely separate. If this was something that was just released after the show had aired, I liked it a lot more.
I would have liked this as a web series, like a short little companion web series or something. That would have been cool.
Exactly. In its current form, it is, for me, the worst episode of the show, purely because of what it detracts from the main story.
You fucking review bombed it, didn't you? You piece of shit.
Well, I didn't watch it until the show was just about finishing, so...
True. No, look, I really fucking liked it, alright? Like, for me, this was one of the last crazy emotionally impactful episodes for me. And that's saying something, because going into there's still we're 3 episodes in, there's 6 episodes left to go. This was one of the last big emotional impacts that the show had on me. Nick Offerman did an amazing job, and I think Murray Bartlett is the Australian bloke who played Frank.
Murray Bartlett plays Frank.
Yeah, they're fucking great.
I'll slightly disagree. I didn't find Frank's character to be on the same level as Bill's.
Fuck off. He was great.
I found Bill's character to be exactly everything I wanted to be. He's quite different from the game, but he landed for me. I believed him as a character. Frank's character, I thought he was good, but wasn't blown away quite the same with Bill. On a personal level, but I accept that that's just a personal thing.
I think it was just how the characters were, though. You've got Bill, who's this very shut off, kind of introverted, happy to be alone, happy to keep everyone out kind of guy. Yeah. And then you've got this really outgoing, extroverted kind of...
Who was literally using Bill for survival, early on when they first met. He was using him.
Yeah,
developed into something. But...
Yeah, but definitely he's using him. He was definitely manipulating him into staying at the start.
I think the problem is more so he's more focused on wanting to paint the house and fucking making strawberries, and that kind of I get it, and it's obviously to show that contrast, but it just made me like him a little bit less.
Bill needed that. Obviously, you want to be with the guy who's full prepper mode. He's I got all the shit from Home Depot. I got all these fucking weapons. I've rigged up the whole thing. You going out there and mowing the lawn and cutting down these things and grabbing the wine and stuff is ruining it. But it's exactly what Bill needs. It's that perfect contrast. He's bringing in a part of the old life, some of the life that maybe Bill never got to experience before the fall, before everything went down. Something that he's never got to explore and have that moments with. He's finally getting to, and it helps him open up as a person throughout the 20 years that they spend together, or the 15 years or however long it is. It's really good for him. They have a really nice dynamic in that way. I get that you don't like him as much, and that's partly intentional because Bill is the titular character
for sure
for this episode. He's the main focus.
Yeah.
But Frank does a really good job at what he does.
Yeah.
When it comes to the scene towards the end of the episode where Joel tells them you're going to have raiders come here and they're going to want to take everything you have, and they have that moment, it's a little bit dumb.
Yep.
A little bit.
Agree.
Yeah, it's cool. It's visually fucking awesome. You've got a guy who's been so protective and so smart and so well thought, literally rigged all these traps outside, standing in the middle of the fucking street with a shotgun or some shit, shooting at the raiders, and then doesn't expect to get shot.
One of the worst scenes in the entire show.
It was silly.
Was that because it's the same kind of thing they were doing with Joel a little bit, right? Bill is a fucking survivor.
Yeah. He
would be up in the window taking shots with the sniper rifle.
Yeah.
Right?
And he has sniper rifles. We know he does.
And there was no need, okay, you can argue, his protective instincts just kicked in and he wasn't thinking straight, but that's bullshit, right? Him walking out in the middle of the fucking street fighting off these raiders for no fucking reason, then getting shot, dumb. They only did it because they wanted a way to have that kind of interesting time skip where one of them's in the wheelchair and we assume it's Bill, but it's actually Frank.
It was a fake out again.
And yeah, I get why they did that, but it didn't work for me. And there's a few other things that didn't work. I didn't like the Joel test scene.
Okay.
I found, I understand we probably needed one. It was a bit clunky for me. 2, by having basically a 90-minute runtime where there's no danger, but besides, one raider attack, it kind of makes the world feel a little bit safer than it should, which is a problem I have with the series moving forward post episode 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final thing I had a problem with was just the pacing of the episode. It felt like we were fucking moving at a snail's pace at times, which is what the show needed to be, but then we quickly time skip and speed up again, and then we go back to slow, and then we time skip and speed up again. It was a bit all over the place for me. I did have some slight pacing issues, nothing dramatic. Yeah, the episode is like you said, it's an emotional kind of story that we get in this moment. Like I said, if it was its own thing, I would have liked it a bit more. I do like that payoff of the note.
Yeah,
and
me too. I think that obviously is the whole point.
Yeah.
But it could have been done in half an hour.
Yeah, but with all of that being said, the cynic in me does prefer the game where Frank just couldn't handle Bill anymore and fucking hangs himself after getting bitten after they have a big fight.
Yeah, I do kind of, from a storytelling perspective, I do...
That makes more sense for Bill's character.
Yeah, it does. Especially the way, they set him up initially the same way in the show as well.
Yeah.
And they can, you have that whole backstory where they can do that. That still is a thing that could have happened. Like, it's still something that could be canon within the show world. Coming across that and the whole interaction they had with Bill in the game flows for the story a bit better.
Yeah.
This was a massive deterrent, and I would have liked for Bill to be alive. Maybe he would be hanging, when Ellie and Joel came in, like he couldn't do it afterwards. But ultimately, I'll forgive it because I think that the love story, the romantic story that they told between Bill and Frank, ending in that way, so fucking beautiful, man. I cried. Did you cry?
No, I didn't.
You bitch. I was balling up like a little baby because they made that.
Oh, actually,
beautiful moment.
I will say, there was one moment that I did cry. I didn't cry during their death, but I did cry when he first tells Bill, and Bill just can't accept it. That bit got me. Okay. Their death didn't get me, but that moment did. But I will say, like, as good as the episode is, we also do, like, sacrifice that Bill and Ellie banter. That was so incredibly fantastic. Yeah, like, that was some of the best moments. And honestly, that's some of the best characterization for Ellie. Yeah. Because it's where we actually see, like, she always kind of gets along with Joel. They have a iffy relationship, but she never fucking, like, is going at Joel, right?
And it was good to see her doing that.
Exactly. It shows her independence and that fucking, like, steel under the eyes kind of thing that's so integral to her character. And then when you take that away, they didn't replace it with anything, so we never really get that in the show.
And that's something as well, I think, kind of hurt Ellie's character in the show, because
for sure
she was in desperate need of development.
Yeah.
At this episode 3, at this point,
she doesn't develop in the early stages of the show at all.
And maybe it's because they spent 90 minutes on a Bill and Frank episode. Like we could have had, maybe they could have interspliced some Ellie stuff in there. I know that wouldn't have worked a lot, but I do agree with you. It did detract from what we needed in that moment. Loved it. Absolutely loved the episode. Yep. Was it necessary? Should it have been included? Probably fucking not. But it was great. I'm glad it came out. I'm glad we got to see it.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
And then we get that moment to, like, Joel and Ellie, like, they have all the supplies in the fucking world. They could just stay there for a bit if they wanted to, but they just take, like, one gun and some toilet paper or some shit.
They do not take enough shit.
No, like...
There's so much stuff there. Literally, Bill leaves it all for Joel. No one else is going to come by here.
That's a problem for me, because it nerfs Joel's character again. Like, Joel from the game would be like, because I know, I played as Joel. I walked around, crouched down through fucking hundreds of clickers, hundreds of hours.
Everything.
I picked up fucking rag cloths, questionable pills. I was excited when I got one fucking pistol bullet. I was over the fucking moon, right? And then here we have, like, this big fucking armory, and Joel's like, I'll take one gun, let's go.
As if he wouldn't even, like, Ellie had to steal a gun, not even from the armory, Like, whatever, you don't want to have a gun.
I would have kitted her out and fucking dual wielded.
Absolutely. Carry my shotgun, carry my rifle, here's 3 pistols for you, 3 for me, you know? Sure. Like, bit of a dumb choice. Yeah. I understand why he doesn't want her to have it, because he doesn't want to expose her to this world. Yeah. She fucking needs it. You are out there, it's dangerous. You have set up how dangerous the world is. Kid her out, bro. Kid her out. Give her a gun. Give the kid a gun.
For sure. I like the episode, as I've already said, but it doesn't work in the 9-episode format.
Okay.
And to me, look, it felt like the creators wanted to inject a homosexual romance for the sake of representation, rather than it being an organic part of the story. Like, we already have a slight, homosexual romance with Ellie's story later on. That's where it makes sense, because the Left Behind stuff is important because it's essential to Ellie's character and gives her more development in that one episode than she kind of gets for, like, so much of the rest of the series, right?
Well, it's not like Bill and Frank weren't gay in the games. We just don't get to see it.
Yeah, for sure. And it just felt like it was a bit forced for me. Like, they wanted to tell this homosexual romance and they were willing to sacrifice the quality of the series to do that.
Like, it almost kind of felt like they were like, we want to have the longest and most engaging gay relationship on a TV show, just to say they did it. Yeah. Instead of, like, actually...
And all the praise they're getting, too, is like, oh, wow, great representation of,
Well, it is.
It really I agree. Is, yeah. It is, but it felt like the episode was made just because they wanted that.
Right. And look, I loved it. I really fucking liked the episode. It is... a great piece of television. It is a great episode. But look, if we're talking about the series as a whole, and we are talking about the series as a whole, you are right. It is a massive distraction from important development that we needed for characters. We needed this episode to be focused on Ellie.
Yep.
And seeing her interact with Bill, we were kind of robbed of that, and it would have helped.
I think this actually would have worked better if maybe this was like an episode later. even. I still think I would have had huge problems with it. But the fact that it happens in episode 3 it's too early and it kills the pacing of the show. Like, we built up nice momentum with episode 1 and 2.
And it pissed off a lot of fucking rednecks, let me tell you.
And just another thing to throw out, like, it kills the pacing of the show for me because we spend 90 minutes on this, but Tess, who is a way more important character, gets 1 episode, really. Like, one and a little bit. And her death is kind of speed ran a little bit as well.
And less emotional than Bill and Frank's death.
Exactly, and I just...
And Frank wasn't even in the game, technically.
Exactly right, you know.
His legs were...
And I do like the moment with the letter, but really, we could have had that moment with the letter without anything before it, and it still would have worked.
It still would have been impactful, even if we got like a shorter thing. You know, I'm not mad at the end of the day that this episode happened. I love this episode. I think it's great. Overall for the show, should have not been as long. Needed more stuff with Joel and Ellie at this point in the series. Delay it, put it later, release it as a different thing. Definitely put it out there for the world. Definitely needs to be seen. It's an amazing episode.
Yeah, so episode 3 was like the first uh-oh moment for me when watching the show. And then I think episode 4 kind of continued that a little bit for me. Episode 4, Please Hold to My Hand, I think is another slight misstep for the series. I think it's definitely one of the weaker episodes of the series for sure.
Yeah.
Starting off, we get that like porno mag scene in the car, which I feared we weren't going to get because of the changes to episode 3 from the game. We do get that in episode 4. It's clunky as fuck. I love the scene. I think, yes, they should have included it, but they did not nail it. The awkward kind of timing between Pedro's like reaction to her saying like the pages are sticky, it was rushed. We needed like a moment where we hold on like a close up of him, you know, awkwardly
kind of
stuttering and trying to figure out like what the fuck to do. Yeah, they completely fucked up the execution of that. Such a small moment, but like fans of the game, you know, they didn't pull it off for me. But I do really like the beginning of this episode, actually. Like, we get a bit of Joel and Ellie bonding, like they're surviving, right? They're driving through. We see him veer off.
Great.
He veers off the main road into the woods to sleep for the night. We get some really nice setup and payoff where he's not able to sleep because he needs to watch over Ellie and just make sure no one comes, and that leads him to the end of the episode where he falls asleep, right? And also the setup and payoff with her mentioning that his right ear is damaged from all of the shooting, and then he falls asleep on the correct side with his good ear up, and then when he gets woken up, he's on his other side. And I really like those little moments. The prod design, like obviously the production design is great in all of the episodes, but this episode really stood out for me because it's the first time we really get to see like a living city.
Yeah.
And it is fantastic. It looks incredible. They did an incredible job of like bringing this post 20-year-old apocalyptic kind of city to life.
There is a serious fucking lack of trash everywhere.
Yeah.
There is none. There's no bottles, there's no fucking papers, there's barely any leaves flying around.
Dude, the infected are environmental friendly.
They fucking cleaned up everything. They're like bringing it back to the thing. There's like barely any trash. There's maybe like 6 papers or something that fly around the whole time.
It makes sense.
Nothing else.
The fungi are basically part of the earth. You know,
so they're like clean up.
They're trying to stop climate change. No, that's a good point, but I think like
overall it's fine. You can forgive it. You can forgive it because it looks still decrepit and old and apocalyptic, but it did kind of bother me a bit.
It is a hard thing to do to just like splash rubbish in every kind of scene though.
Just empty the bin into the shot. That's it. That would have helped.
But we finally get a lot of that Joel and Ellie bonding that we should have got earlier in the series.
And it lands.
Yeah, like we're in episode 4. We're fucking nearly halfway through the series, and this is like the stuff that we should really be getting in episode 2 happening. You know, we get like the pun book stuff, which is a fantastic inclusion from the game.
Yeah.
All of those moments are really like subtle in the game and happen throughout when you're exploring and stuff. They're not like cutscenes or anything.
And it's good to see Joel's reaction to the pun books and the joke that kind of come off here.
And it changes. Yeah, exactly. Again, nice setup, nice payoff. I really enjoyed all of that. There's a few problems with this episode in particular. One, the direction of the action sequence where they get jumped by the raiders and there's that whole famous moment like he's not really injured or whatever. They did not execute that anywhere close to the tension of the games.
Towards the end in the laundry, like in the city?
Yeah. So they hit a roadblock and they have to go around into the city. They see a man stumbling out asking for help. Ellie's like, "Oh, I'm going to stop and help him," you know, befitting of a character, not knowing the world, and Joel says he's not even injured. And then he calls it right. It was a fucking ambush. That stuff's great. Felt super tense. Mm-hmm. Everything post car crash sucked for me.
disagreeing a little bit there.
Disagree?
I really thought it was quite like the game. Even just the interactions between the people shooting sounds like lines straight out of the game. Sounds like something experience. You know, you've got the
Except
you
in
fucking killed him. You know?
Except in the game, there's like 2 waves and there's like 15 enemies.
Goes on for quite a bit longer.
Yeah.
But I think they do a really good way of like showing Joel like doing that kind of like survivalist shit that we haven't seen him do before. He feels a bit more jaded. He feels a bit older, and he feels a bit weaker in this kind of. Like,
That's what I didn't like. He felt weaker. There were only 3 enemies, and it was such a big struggle for Joel.
It felt realistic though.
But no, it didn't to me, because like that, the way that the direction of the action sequence and the way it played out, it did not feel as realistic as it should have been.
I thought it felt very similar to the games, and I liked the way it played out. It did feel tense, while not as tense as previous episodes. It did still build up to a point. I think it kind of like really kind of played off the game in a similar way. Like it did feel a lot like that. I do think Joel was not as competent as he could have been in combat as perhaps he was in the first game, but it's just because, you know, Pedro's a bit of an older man, and he's portraying what seems like an older Joel. You know, he's going to be a bit more lethargic. He's going to have a bit more difficulty. He's got like partially deaf. He's got like scars all over him. You know, he's fucking been through it. He's traumatized. He's got a lot of different weaknesses that game Joel doesn't have. So it's obviously going to be a bit harder for him.
Yeah, look, this action sequence obviously needed to be different to the game, because the game is like a whole like gameplay level, right? Whereas the TV show just needs to be one kind of like moment. For me, the TV show wasn't tense, and I didn't like how Joel was like, go hide in the cupboard for Ellie. I understand the point of it, but I found it quite clunky how she was...
It wasn't even a cupboard, it was like a weird hole.
A hole in the wall, yeah. I found it a bit clunky how she was just able to do that. Mid-gunfight, I thought the way it played out was lacking like a lot of tension. Like Joel drops one guy super easy, but then a guy sneaks up on him out of nowhere and gets the better of him. I do kind of like that element where it's like, okay, Ellie shoots him and Joel's like, that was my fault, shouldn't have had to do
I
that.
love that.
I like that as well, but it's way worse than where she actually does kill someone in the game, kills them, not just shoots them and wounds them for Joel to finish off. She kills someone, and the execution of that where she's like, I feel sick, so much better in the game. And that was one element, like it could have been more powerful. But let me just pitch this to you, right? So let's say the car crash plays out exactly as it does, and then boom, we have that car crash moment. What if instead we cut to like a dazed kind of like Saving Private Ryan opening-esque moment, right, where he's just hit his head on the steering wheel and he's coming to, and then he turns around and sees fucking Ellie getting dragged out of the car by one of these raiders, and he just goes into fucking protective mode, right? Goes out there, can't grab his rifle in time because someone else is grabbing him. He uses his fucking whatever he can grab, like he grabs something on the ground, he grabs something in the store, he uses his fucking bare hands. A brick would have been a nice little moment, and he fucking sees that Ellie's in trouble and just goes fucking primal mode, and we see that rage moment that we get in the pilot episode where he goes apeshit, and this is where you save it for. It would have been so much better, so much more intense, right, than what we get, like them hiding behind cover, pop shot, Ellie, go hide in the hole in the wall, oh, I'm deaf, I couldn't hear a person sneak up behind me in this random doorway. It just didn't land for me at all. It was so much worse than what the games were, and even though this is a moment where it's like, you know, you can't really do that verbatim at all, they could have done something so much better, and
what you
they
pitched is cool. I like it.
It's better.
I don't know if it's better because, you know, you have issues. People are like, oh, he could have been shot. You know, it could have been like, there's so many instances where it could have gone like wrong in that moment. If you're trying to argue Joel is a smarter character in the games, and it's not going to be, you know, him doing that in the show is a little bit silly. It's a little bit dangerous, even though it is primal. But I do think it would have been better to have him do that here instead of episode 1. It would have been a good moment for that.
For sure.
I am not super mad about it because I did like the action execution. I think it could have been a bit clearer at certain points. But I think leading up to Ellie having to shoot that one guy, that young kid, was really cool. It was a really good moment. That kid did amazing. I'd give him an Oscar. He's my favourite performer. He did a really fucking good job. You know, he's pleading for his life. He's trying everything. You know, he's trying to like humanize himself. He's trying to talk about his family, his name. He's trying to stop Joel from fucking eventually killing him. But he does have to, and you hear him crying out. You hear him screaming and begging and pleading, and it makes Joel seem like a really bad guy. at this point in the series, it's a good moment to see that because you set up like a little bit of what he's had to go through to get here. You know, it's been hinted at before, but we've not really got to see too much of that up until this moment, apart from episode 1. But it's awesome. It's a very good moment. I really like that moment. But you're right. It could have been done differently. It could have been executed better. And the hole in the wall shit is stupid.
Yeah, I agree. I think it could have been better. And the two key things I would have personally, if I was directing this scene, would have been to convey, right? Because you have that nice world building moment where Joel knows immediately because, like he mentions just later in the next scene, that he's been on both sides, right? It's a real learning experience for Ellie. And it also gives Joel's character like so much depth instantly, right? To show that, okay, he is a fucking bad dude, right? And it's the first time we really get to see that in both the game and the show.
Yeah.
The two big changes I would have made was one, like have them actually get jumped a bit more, you know, like have them fucking getting Ellie out of the car and attacking Joel like as he's fucking waking up after this massive
stakes.
Car accident. So much more tense in that regard. Have Joel fucking go primal when he sees Ellie, you know, maybe about to get raped or getting dragged away or getting fucking beat on and she's fighting back or something. Have him go apeshit and, you know, attack and pummel that man. Then have Joel pay for that by having another guy get the better of him while he's doing that, right? And then have Ellie step in with the gun that she took and kill the man, not shoot him, kill him to save Joel's fucking life. And boom, you have so much more character development. It's a way more important moment than what she does, where she just hides on the other side of the wall, creeps out, shoots him, wounds him, he begs for his life, Joel kills him. That's okay, but it could have been so much better. Like, imagine if it should have been like they did with the games. They should have combined that moment in the game where Ellie kills her first man, right? They should have combined that with this in here and have Joel's primal instincts and protective instincts of Ellie get the better of him, and he pays for it, which what should have been with his life. But because Ellie took the gun on her own accord that Joel wouldn't give him, she saves his life and kills him. Not wounds him, shoots him dead. And she's fucked up from that. She can open up a little bit later on as well about how that wasn't her first kill. That would have been better.
That would have been better at that moment too, compared to what we experienced later on, I think in like episode 8, of that kind of like really glossed over experience of Ellie having to kill someone. We won't go into it right now, but it would have been cool to see that earlier on and have that developed out a little bit longer, because it would have been something that Ellie and Joel could have worked on together instead of something that was kind of forgotten about and glossed over ultimately. I do agree with you, you're right. And I do have to say as well with this episode, it's the first episode for me, especially after the hit and the emotional impact of the previous episode, even though it was a distraction from the series. I do think that this episode for me was very slow paced.
Yeah.
One of the misses for me.
It spends way too much time trying to develop Kathleen, a new antagonist that is in the game but only ever mentioned by name and is never like actually seen in the game. They spend so much time trying to develop her in both this episode and episode 5, and for me, none of it was necessary. I get it, and again, I have no issue with it if we have a longer episode count for the series, but because we're at such a restricted 9 episode count, all this development towards Kathleen's character was just completely unnecessary for me. It was a slow episode because of it. The moments that I liked from this episode were the small little moments between Joel and Ellie, and I wanted more of that.
That development for them.
But we didn't get it, and for me, this was definitely one of the weaker episodes of the series.
I have to say, Kathleen, her whole thing, I really didn't vibe with at all. Like, I don't even remember her being mentioned in the game, but she's just
some like goons when like you're hiding from the trucks that are driving past. They just mention her name like, oh, Kathleen's gonna be pissed, or Kathleen needs us to find Henry. Like that's basically the development she gets in the game.
Amazing. Well, they give her way too much in the show because it's super visually distracting for me.
Yeah.
She's this fucking Karen mum type person.
Substitute teacher, I heard someone say.
Yeah, that's a really good way to describe it. She gives substitute teacher vibes. I understand they're probably trying to do that intentionally, but it really takes me out of it. She sounds, acts, speaks, talks, moves like this Karen substitute teacher mum type character. And she's trying to do all this badass shit. She's this badass leader who's dangerous and will go fucking crazy. She does not give that vibe at any fucking point. She goes and she kills that doctor. Right, she interrogates him. She walks outside.
Who
walks
birthed
back in.
her?
Yeah, something that should be really emotional, and she does it so coldly. But it just kind of feels like she doesn't even act. You know, she's just kind of like doing it. I don't feel anything towards that. I don't feel anything towards Kathleen. I don't feel anything towards any of these fucking people except for that one kid who gets killed. The only one I care about is realistically that one kid who died, and I'm including Henry and Sam in that.
Oof. Okay, well, let's move on to episode 5 because basically episode 4 and 5 are part 1, part 2.
Yeah.
Super strange to me that of all the story arcs in The Last of Us,
Yeah.
the Sam Henry story arc, which we don't even really kick off until the very end of episode 4.
Literally the last scene.
It gets more or less 2 episodes of development towards the arc at least, not towards literally Sam and Henry, but towards that part of the game. It gets 2 episodes. Yet you're telling me David only gets fucking 1? Mind-blowing to me. But anyway, I won't go into that right now. So episode 5, we obviously end episode 4 with that cliffhanger where they get woken up. Joel, like I said, fell asleep on the wrong side, wasn't able to hear the intruders come in, and they're held at gunpoint. And I like some of this stuff, right? I think the change that they made with Sam being deaf wasn't necessary, but it was cool.
It's cool.
It was a nice change that made it different from the game. It was not worse in any way whatsoever. It was a bit unique.
Except for every fucking time he has to write something out on his little padlet,
slow.
and it takes like fucking 20 minutes for him to
True.
write one word, and everyone sits around looking at him until he finishes it. Like, just everyone learn sign language, please.
Plus, I've seen like the deaf character a little bit, you know, for me personally being such a big buff, like I've seen it so many times, it's a tiny bit cliche for me, but look, I had no issue with that. I thought that was a completely fine, solid change.
It's totally fine.
I also really liked the care that they put into Sam and Henry's backstory. On paper, their backstory is fantastic, right? And I like too, we get to see the flashbacks and how they really fleshed out, you know, that situation a bit more as well, with Sam and Henry. I enjoyed that bit. I would have liked to have seen that part from the game where Sam and Henry take Ellie and leave Joel behind, like we get in that game where basically Joel gets left behind for dead during this tense kind of chase moment. I really liked that. We don't get it in the show. It doesn't make sense in the context of the show, but I think it was a cool moment that was kind of missing. Episode 5 is probably one of my least favorite episodes.
I agree. Honestly,
and it's actually the highest rated episode on IMDb.
Because of the visual spectacle at the end.
Yep.
That's it.
That's it.
Also, as well, I think, at least for me personally, I didn't really resonate that much with the Sam and Henry story. As much as I did in the game.
I agree completely. On paper, like they flesh out their story, it's
Yeah.
fantastic, right? Sam has like leukemia, which is a super weird kind of like they could have just said he was sick and they didn't know what it was. Like leukemia seemed very specific, and then to say that there was some pills that could fix it. I'm no expert on leukemia, but that didn't make a ton of sense to me. Yeah, it could have been like insulin, he was diabetic, or just something that's a little bit
a simple medication.
It's a bit simpler than fucking leukemia. Right, but I really liked how they fleshed out like his motivations and the kind of conflict and then the repercussion that has with like Kathleen's character. On paper it's great. They did not pull it off.
No, yeah. Like you said, a really good idea, like executed on paper, like it's well thought out. Did not come across very well. And I did not buy that Kathleen, this mum character, is going to go on this massive rampage to go and hunt this guy who I understand she cares about her brother.
Yeah.
You know, I would have liked to have seen some stuff with the brother as well. That scene where she's in the bedroom and Perry's talking to her. He's this hard-ass military guy. Big beard, long hair, hard-ass military dude who you look like should be running the show.
Who plays Tommy in the games,
Who does play Tommy in the games, which is an incredible addition. Taking orders from this fucking woman. Sorry.
Okay, we're cancelled.
From this like...
Substitute teacher.
From this substitute teacher, Karen woman who should not be running the show because she was related to the original leader.
She reminds me of that villain from Harry Potter. I think it's the 6th one.
Dolores Umbridge.
Yeah.
She's literally Dolores with a gun.
Yeah, except like lamer.
Yeah, for sure. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
I don't buy Kathleen's story. The whole scene with her like talking about her brother in her childhood bedroom sucked for me. Did not land. Did not care about it at all. So when it eventually comes to the climax at the end of the episode, I didn't care about it at all. You know, there were no stakes for me in that moment. Part of it was because I knew it was going to happen within the game. You know, they could have changed things. They've been shown to change things before.
They've changed quite a bit with this. Like, they played with the order of the way things play out with, like, that underground bit and the kids' room and stuff. And so here's the big problem I have with both the show as a whole, but this episode in particular, this really stands out, right? Throughout the game, you're always overcoming obstacles. You know, a room full of infected here, an open area with men with guns here, a clicker in this room here, a tense sequence underground here with spores and clickers. Like, you're always overcoming these different obstacles. But here, the show seems to kind of forget about these little encounters and instead wanted to save it up for all this one big encounter, which happens at the end of episode 5. Right. Let's start off by the beginning of this action sequence. So we start off by the characters are all walking along talking, and then a sniper comes out of nowhere and just starts shooting them. And the sniper literally has fucking rapid fire equipped to his sniper rifle.
This fucking granddad, by the way.
Yeah, because he fires like 25 shots and not one of them hit. There's zero tension at all when you have a sniper rifle that's firing that often and missing that much.
He's literally legally blind, I think.
Yeah. He has unlimited ammo. He never has to reload ever. He's firing so incredibly quick that's just completely unrealistic for like a bolt action sniper rifle, right? And there's no tension. If he fired like 2 shots the entire time, way more tense than him.
We don't know where he is.
Exactly.
We don't know when he's going to shoot again.
Than him spamming it and shooting fucking cars and shit. And like, I get that, like, when Joel finally does reach him, we see it's like some fucking old dude who's probably blind as shit, right? Like, I guess that justifies it, but it makes it way less tense than what in the game. Like, the game is so incredibly tense, and there's more obstacles than just the fucking sniper. But anyway, that being a problematic point as it is, Joel being able to sneak up on him like he does is just, it's clunky. It doesn't really work. It's a bit unrealistic. Clunky. It's not like the game at all. And then he finally gets that moment. I'm like, okay, we're going to see it. And then fucking out of nowhere, like, Kathleen arrives. So we have Kathleen and fucking 20 fucking jeeps, it feels like. Like, the entire fucking army that she has.
The whole city is here.
Yeah.
I understand she cares about Henry and Sam. I know she wants them way too much.
But Henry is no threat because he's like a pacifist. He's killed one person in his entire life, right? He's not really a threat.
He didn't even directly kill that person, right?
No, I don't think so.
No, it was just his actions that kind of led to that, which is why she's after him in the first place. And she's like, bring everyone, it's time for war against this guy and his deaf brother.
Yeah, and this sequence from here to the end, this is probably the worst stretch of the entire show for me.
Yeah.
So we start off with some absolutely terrible blocking and direction of this scene. So basically, all these cars pull up out in the middle of nowhere. Again, there's no threat of infected ever coming out of nowhere or anything like that. So it's just them. They all walk out in the open, and then we see like Sam, Henry, and Ellie hiding behind a car. And then she's walking forward where she's literally like, 10 meters away from where they are?
Car,
the blocking is terrible. It doesn't work whatsoever. The fact that there's like so many men as well instantly told me that it's not going to play out like I think it will. Like, Joel cannot save this situation. If there were less people, it makes it more tense because we go, okay, Joel has a chance here to try and save them.
Well, that's the thing.
How's it going to unfold? But when you show us such an overwhelmingly large number of goons, you alleviate that tension.
That's what you were talking about, like with the game, like having those certain sections where there's like certain people in those rooms and a couple of clickers here and something you have to overcome here. Those all feel achievable. Mm-hmm. Difficult in the game, of course, but every single one of them you know is achievable because you have to get through it.
Yeah.
Right? This, super overwhelming, unable to be like sorted with one sniper rifle and 3 people hiding behind a car.
Exactly.
Nothing you can
Especially when she's literally like so close to them and they're having a conversation and she's acting like she doesn't know where they are.
She can't fucking hear them even though she's 10 meters away.
And there's just one car that's the only place they could possibly be and she doesn't recognize
20 guys with you and they're all just walking behind you instead of spreading out and looking.
Yeah, it's terrible. Especially when the sniper guy calls in and then is not answering the radio so they know that
he's up there and they're still out there in the open.
Absolutely terrible. And then we get, and I do not care that this was foreshadowed at all, we get one of the biggest fucking Deus Ex Machina moments that I've ever seen, where just at the perfect time when Henry's gone up, he's surrendered himself, he's out in the open, and we think, okay, this is where she's gonna fucking execute him. This truck just falls through into the ground or some shit. Or was there an explosion? I can't quite remember.
Like the ground opens up in the house.
At this perfect moment, for no reason, nothing like cued this, you know?
Timing, bro.
Like there wasn't, something that obvious that happened, like, like a Joel shooting like a gas tank of a car or something.
Or like a big noise.
Yeah, like there was nothing that motivated it. It just kind of happened out of nowhere for the sake of it needing to happen, like a Deus Ex Machina moment, but to save Henry. The ground opens up and we see fucking all of these infected come out of the ground. We get the bloater for the first time after not seeing it in episode 3, and this made me cringe. This is the worst execution. This is the worst part of the adaptation for me, because this isn't The Last of Us. This is some fucking Walking Dead type shit.
It's random Walking Dead, it's random Game of Thrones White Walker shit, you know? Like, that's not how the infected work or move or anything like that. Why did Neil think this was cool?
Like, I understand, okay, they sealed off the infected underground.
Gotcha.
Doesn't really make sense to me.
Why they grouped up, why they're taking leaders from the blow, like...
And they come from a basement of just a random house?
They can move around the whole city underground.
And they're out of the city?
And
there's a blow to them? They don't hear anything?
We saw a hole in the city, in the bottom of an apartment thing. That's what they set up as, like, that's something we have to be concerned about here, in this location, in this basement. Fucking miles away on the outskirts of the city, they all come up from there for no reason. They're just there because the plot told them to be there. You know, they're there for comedic timing. They're there to be a Deus Ex Machina and to be a cool visual spectacle because they got money.
Yeah.
You know, they want to show off this incredible sequence where the bloater comes out of the ground with all these infected and there's fire behind him and it looks awesome. And it deals with Kathleen and Perry, who really shouldn't have that many people there at all, just to be cool. It doesn't work.
It was terrible, and it was one of those examples that I had concerns about, where they focus on spectacle over the characters. And again, like, this whole sequence was just completely unnecessary. We could have just had the single sole sniper, and that, like I said, like a way more intense kind of situation where Joel takes it upon himself as the protector to put his life on the line and deal with the fucking situation, and then deal with it. Maybe some infected come out of nowhere, just a few, and they have to scramble to run away like they do in the games. The way it's set up in the TV show is terrible. The bloater, look, it's cool seeing the bloater from the games make its way into the TV show. I did not like it. I did not like
it. Wasn't necessary. It didn't even have an impact.
The fucking, like, 20 men with, like, assault rifles gunning them down, but the infected, like, they're just, after basically getting no infected since episode 2, where we get, like, those real rare little moments with the clickers, to just see, like, 50 come out of nowhere.
It was overdoing it.
Didn't work. A child clicker as well. I didn't like that. It was completely unbelievable that, yes, Sam gets bit, which we'll get to in a second, but, like, for Henry and Ellie to come out, like, completely unscathed, and the situation is fucked. The stuff with Joel, like, not missing a single bullet.
Until the child one, when it was necessary.
Exactly. Like, I didn't like the execution of anything. The blocking, the direction, the visual spectacle going way over the top. This is not The Last of Us, and it was terrible for me.
From a story point of view as well, I don't really think we needed to wrap up Perry and Kathleen's character in that way. They were not...
Perry's death is so fucking dumb too, where he just, like, looks away, run, I'll buy you some time, and then just immediately gets, like, ripped apart. Like...
what a way to use Tommy's, like...
I laughed. I laughed. It was cringe-worthy laughter coming out.
It's just not necessary. They set these characters up. They spent time setting these characters up only to have them completely destroyed by this random visual spectacle of infected. And I don't care about it. Like you were saying, it would have been a much more, like, cool scene if it was Joel struggling to overcome a competent sniper up in the window, and then...
Smaller scale.
Yeah, and then Perry and, like, Kathleen arriving at the last second, just having missed Henry and Sam.
Yep.
That would have been fine. Then we never see them again.
Yep, I agree completely. Or don't even bother with Kathleen and Perry's character.
Yeah, you shouldn't have included them that much in this way anyway.
Yeah, for sure. The problems don't even end with that action sequence, because somehow they just managed to walk away and escape, even though, like, thousands of infected are fucking swarming from underground.
Barely an inconvenience.
But they don't even bother to, like, chase. Like, didn't completely buy that. But then we have that moment with Ellie and Sam in the bedroom. They have, like, a fair bit of, like, a one-on-one interaction, lots of back and forth writing down conversation. Look, I liked the scene.
It's a 35-minute scene.
Yeah, I liked the scene. I thought Bella's performance was really strong in this scene in particular. And then Sam shows Ellie the bite. And for me, Sam showing Ellie his bite is one of the worst changes from the game. I hated it. Look, lots of people are saying that it's actually better than the game, and look, everyone's entitled to their opinion. That's great. So what we get in the show is Sam shows Ellie the bite. Ellie's like, "Oh no, you're bitten. Let me here." Cuts her hand, rubs some of her blood on it, and then promises to try and stay up all night with him.
That's
and then
some 6-year-old shit.
Falls asleep. Yeah, absolutely. This is not These are the actions befitting of a 14-year-old that grew up in our normal civilization.
Yeah.
She was born in this world.
And she's shown that she's, like, a different, like, a more mature kind of version of a teenager throughout the whole show so far.
It contradicts her character because she is a independent, although she doesn't know much about the world, she's been kind of sheltered. She is a smart, independent character that's got what it takes to survive, and we see that later on. For me, it feels like a big contrast, but also I really just hated the decision, because Sam showing the bite to Ellie and then her choosing to ignore it is such a dumb decision to make. but also it makes the moment where Sam attacks Ellie so much worse.
They kind of like play it off as like, oh, he's awake, he's just sitting on the bed, which is super random as well, by the way.
It's because he's deaf.
Ah, so he reacts differently.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Because he's deaf and like when they get infected, they carry over the traits, right?
Yeah.
He can't hear anything around him, so like he, you know, basically passed to being an infected in that position. And Ellie falling asleep's fine, like promises to stay up, I just couldn't do it, whatever. But her trying to, like, knowing about the bite and not telling Joel is just a big problem for me.
Big time.
And then when we actually get like that really fucking tense scene where Sam's attacking Ellie and Joel comes in, like I thought the execution of that moment with Henry was really good. Like how he just almost kind of like flinchingly shoots. You know, I liked the execution of that, but it would have been so much better if Sam just fucking kept it to himself. Because he's so much younger than Ellie. He's a young kid. It makes total sense for a young kid like that age to not tell anyone and just go to bed and hope everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
The fact that he tells Ellie and Ellie's interaction, I really dislike that change.
Can I say the execution of this scene, I think, was done a lot worse than the game.
Oh, for sure. It was
Like,
definitely
so
worse.
much better.
But I do like the actual, like, the flinch shot moment.
It was fine. It was fine. I think it's a little bit weirder. I think it's not as emotional. I know people spoke about this and they said that like they really like felt this was one of the most emotional moments of the show.
Not for me.
Didn't land for me at all. I did not care about it. And I didn't, like, Brianna was crying next to me watching this scene. I didn't feel anything towards it. Maybe it's because I was sour about the scene just before it. The whole fucking, like, the visual spectacle scene. But it didn't click for me at all. It wasn't working for me. I didn't care about Henry and Sam as much as I did in the game. And I think the inclusion of, like, Ellie, knowing about the bite, not doing anything about it, despite seeing that she's a smart, intelligent character.
It's a big contradiction.
Big contradiction. Didn't land as much knowing that it was going to happen, where it could have just been a shock when she didn't find out about it, you know, it would have been more tense in that moment. And I think Henry's reaction is a little bit like worse.
Well, he doesn't blame Joel as much as he did in the game, and in that moment in the game, like it makes him, it's more believable, you know, because he's just had to fucking kill his younger brother. He's been fighting his entire life to protect,
more emotional.
Right? And then he's fucking done in that moment, and we really buy it, and he's blaming Joel, he's looking for fucking just anything, and then he ultimately makes that decision to take his own life. I think in the TV show they don't quite nail it as much as they did in the game.
Yeah, I don't buy that he wants to kill himself in that moment as much as I did in the game.
Yeah.
Doesn't come over across as well. Just kind of felt like they were like being true because that's what happened in the game. Like that's why they did it.
Yeah.
You know, I understand it's emotional for him. He's tried to protect him, like, throughout these past 2 episodes. Just doesn't land as much.
So I think we both agree that this is the worst episode of the series, of season 1?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Okay.
I don't know about that.
Okay, oh, spicy.
Yeah.
Well, for me personally, I think it is the worst.
Okay.
And the fact that it's the highest rated on IMDb just goes to show how much I hate general audience members.
Everyone who rated this highly because the fucking bloater was cool, fuck off.
Yeah, well, look, I think I don't mind like some of the changes on paper. Like I do kind of like the idea of Kathleen on paper. Her killing the doctor, ignoring her brother's basically wishes to make sure that she forgives when he dies, like her ignoring that forgiveness and then her doing everything in her power to get revenge is basically just a nice way to prelude the events of The Last of Us 2 in a way. It's basically mirroring that exact story, but we didn't need it and they didn't execute it. But moving on to episode 6, Kin. I liked this episode. I thought this was a return to form. I did not like episodes 3, 4, and 5. This is where the show, like everyone was hyping up the show about how this is one of the greatest TV shows of all time. Mm-hmm. And for me personally, I get 3 bad episodes for different reasons in a row. Episode 6 is a return to form for me. I do quite like a lot of the smaller moments. Like for me, a lot of my favorite moments of the TV show were those really slow moments between Joel and Ellie, you know, them building their relationship. Like I like the really solid opening that we have where they build a bit more and they get the moment where they're sleeping out and Joel falls asleep, but Ellie takes care of it, which again contradicts just what happened with her not telling Joel about Sam being bitten. And I like these moments, but again, they overdo it. So when they're out basically trekking through the snow, all of a sudden, fucking out of nowhere, a whole brigade of fucking horses,
Wild West cowboy rangers,
come out of nowhere. Look, no issue with that whatsoever.
It was fine. It was cool.
Why did there have to be so many? Because again, like I was saying, with having like the 20 armed men and approach Joel, it alleviates tension when you have so many.
It wasn't that many here though.
I think there was like maybe 10.
It was a fine
Too
amount,
many.
in my
If
opinion.
there was
I
just
think it was fine.
if there were just 2 horses, so much more tense because we believe that okay, at any moment Joel could fucking pull his gun and take these men down. But again, like we've seen, Joel hasn't really been represented as being that badass like he is in the game.
I think this was intentional though. Like that overwhelming force here, it really kind of felt like this is going to be.
But they're out in the middle of nowhere, you know.
But
how can they get
warned at the start of this episode by the Native American couple? They were like, if you cross the river,
which
here,
I loved all of that stuff.
That was great. That was fantastic. If you cross the river at this point, you will it's dangerous. So it immediately comes into effect with these people showing up, and it kind of pays off really well because Joel was warned about this. He still does it anyway, and then he's waiting there, and it's that moment of like, I'm going to lose my daughter again, even though he's not really recognized their relationship.
And he freezes.
Yeah. And it's really good to show that trauma in Joel.
I agree completely.
It's tense
but
too.
It would have been more tense and more of a big moment for him to freeze up if there was a realistic number of men that he could have actually killed.
I'm fine with the number of men.
I have a problem with it. I also have a problem how they fucking pull a dog out of their asses.
Hey, I like the dog.
They pull a dog out of their ass. Or where they're just randomly trekking through the snow with 10 fucking men on horses and a dog that sniffs for infected people.
Dogs are quick, bro.
Yeah,
I've seen it before. They chase like.
It's not very good at its fucking job. Like it had one fucking job.
Maybe it's like sniffing for really infected.
Yeah. I don't know. See, I just personally think less is more in that kind of situation. If you have less people, it's more tense. If we have to wait for them to get to travel back to some other place for the dog, that's more tense. We get a bit more of a build up rather than them being like, "Who are you?" Tense moment for like 2 minutes. Dog comes. Tension alleviated. Oh, now we're back to happy with Tommy.
I thought it was fine. I liked it because you didn't know who they were initially when they show up. You might have some idea because you're about the point in the game where this.
Joel freezing up does not matter because the odds were insurmountable.
But he's freezing up because the odds are insurmountable in that moment.
Disagree. He's freezing up because of the PTSD.
It's just triggering him in that way. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I think that it was a very tense scene. The dog coming up to Ellie, I really thought it was going to go off. Joel was going to have to fucking do something, and he was not prepared to because it was an overwhelming.
But we know that wasn't going to happen because there were fucking too many people for Joel to ever get out of that situation. Realistically, we knew that the dog.
Knocked out.
That's true. That's true. Like they could have been knocked out, but my point is the tension would have been so much more if it was like just 2 people.
Right, 3 people, just one to overwhelm it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's fine. It would have been fine with 3. I think it was fine the way it was.
Yeah.
But it could have been better with 2. I'm not going to argue with you there because I think you're right. It would have been fine that way too. Would have been more believable for Joel to overcome that situation. Don't have a problem with it though.
That's fine. And they get back to the town anyway, which is the more important stuff. The way they recreated it from the game, incredible. Some of the best production design I think I've ever seen, because the fact that they're adapting a video game, they have to go to the fucking extra effort to make it look almost scene for scene in terms of these phrases.
Absolutely. It looks incredible.
Except we get that snow stuff, which is more linked to The Last of Us 2.
Yeah.
But it's so fucking good.
It's a blend. It's a setup.
I do miss a lot of the dam stuff. I would have personally included it if I was adapting this. I would have cut some of the fat that we've talked about. I know. They could have had more time. I would have liked some more of that kind of stuff than what we've got so far. But look, I don't really have a problem with speedrunning it. What I do have a problem with is I do find the chemistry between Pedro Pascal and Gabriel Luna to be slightly off. I don't buy Tommy in the show quite as much as the game. In the game, I love his character a lot. I don't in the show.
Tommy's quite different in the show.
Yeah, he is. He is quite different. That's correct. One big moment that I think was a missed opportunity was Tess's death and the conflict that should have had between Joel and Tommy, right? Tess essentially dies because they're trying to get back to Tommy. When Joel finds out that Tommy basically just stopped contacting him, Joel has a right to be fucking angry because that cost Tess's life.
Yeah, obviously it evolves. It's no longer that point by the time they do set out on their mission with Ellie.
Yeah.
But the essential, what they sacrificed up until that point, it could have been months leading up to that point. And Tess got beat up for that at the very least.
Missed opportunity to not have some conflict there, I think.
Agree. But I think they wanted to really make that emotional kind of reconnection between Tommy and Joel, and it did work. That moment where he runs up to him in that episode, really cool.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some moments throughout that do land for me.
Yeah.
But for me, I found it a bit inconsistent. Gabriel's performance as Tommy, I'm not sold on it. I know a lot of people really love him. They think he sounds just like Tommy from the game, and they really do like it. For me, I'm just not quite there yet. Look, there's potential with him, I'll say, but I didn't quite buy it in this episode in particular. He just wasn't as charismatic for me.
I didn't buy it in the pilot. I really liked him in this episode.
Really, I'm kind of the opposite.
No, I think he really came into it here, like in this episode. Like, obviously, there was a few pacing issues when they started to get into the town. You know, it does feel a bit more relaxy. I think they are trying to set up the home kind of lifestyle they could have for season 2. You know, that kind of part 2 blending as well. Something that I really loved, and a scene that I think a lot of people really enjoy, is that shoe shop scene in this episode where Joel's in there at night. He's fixing up his shoes, and there's that beautiful emotional monologue that he gives about Sarah. And it's an amazing performance from Pedro, but I believe that Gabriel Luna as well gave his all, even in the shots that he wasn't in. Just so Pedro had something to bounce off of, and I really appreciate that from an actor, and I think that they both did a great job in that scene, because it's one of my favourite moments in the show. It really fucking lands for me. Yeah,
it didn't quite hit with me quite as much, and I just found like some of their moments to be slightly inconsistent, like that moment that they have with his wife as well, and they're sitting down eating like food for the first time. That scene was a bit clunky for me. Another scene that like is one of the most important moments in the entire game, right, is when Ellie runs away. They have to track her down, and they finally get to her with, you know, the bandits at the house, and they have that confrontation where it's the first big fight, and really only big fight, that Joel and Ellie have, right? Where he essentially has that huge blow up at her and says, "I'm not your dad." And that is, for me, probably my favorite. It's hard to say favorite because there's so many incredible moments from the game, right? But that for me is like
one of your favorite.
It's flawless. It's incredible. And there's so much build up to that as well, with Ellie running away. Completely makes sense, right? Joel's motivations, even though Joel is a character that we love, completely makes sense for us as the player, right? For Joel to act the way he did, right? And Ellie's reaction as well, like, I've lost people too. It's all incredible. The show does not do it justice.
It's almost verbatim the same script though.
Yeah, it's verbatim, and the performances are worse, it's clunkier, and the fact that we don't have that whole build up as well with Ellie running away, it just kind of like gets speed ran into like one scene in a room, and then we move on. It didn't do it justice without having that extra time and effort go into it for me.
That's fine. I agree with you there, honestly. It does kind of feel like it comes out of place. Ellie only finds out about Sarah, like, I think a scene or two beforehand when this happens, so there's not that build up that comes to it. It is a good moment though in the show. It doesn't miss, you know.
No, it doesn't miss, but it's significantly inferior to the game version.
That's fair. I'll give you that for sure. Like, I think this episode was overall pretty good.
It's solid.
Yeah. Speaking from that kind of, just like, for me, 4 and 5 being bad, first 3 being great, 4 and 5 being kind of like mid-tier compared to like the rest of the show. 6 was good. You know, it kind of brought me back.
It was a return to form for me personally.
So I really did enjoy a lot of moments, and I think that the Tommy and Joel stuff was some of the best stuff in the entire show for me. It really showed a side to a more traumatized, kind of emotionally, I wouldn't say weaker Joel, but more kind of like...
They really shoehorned that PTSD element into this episode in particular. And I've got problems with it, which I'll round back to at the end. Right. But speaking of controversial episodes, like we discussed episode 3, which is controversial for a few different reasons, but another controversial episode for similar reasons actually is episode 7, Left Behind, which actually adapts not the main game, but the Left Behind DLC from the game.
I never played it.
Really?
It came as a part of the disc. You know, I had it with the game. I just didn't get to it afterwards. I think my disc drive in my PlayStation stopped functioning shortly after that. So I never got around to finishing the Left Behind. Like, I was planning on playing it when I replayed part 1, like when I buy the PS5 version. But no, I never saw it. So this was all new content to me watching this episode.
Okay. So we're coming from, for the first time, different perspectives, because I've played the DLC multiple times. I love the DLC. DLC. I think it's incredibly important backstory to Ellie's character. It's an incredible story, like talking about how episode 3 is just a masterful piece of writing and art and storytelling, right? This is the same thing for me, but it actually is from the game. Like, we're adapting an important part of the game, even though it is DLC. It is essential if you're making a television adaptation, right? And we're getting that important stuff. I can tell from your body language watching you right now, you didn't like this episode.
I didn't love it. No, I didn't. I really felt like it came at a weird, like, I understand why it came in after Joel was shot in the previous episode.
Yep.
You know, so it kind of comes in a bit of a lull. We see a bit of the start off in this. I really felt like they built up to something there, though, with the end of it, and then they spend this whole episode doing that, doing this whole Left Behind there, and it doesn't hit for me at all.
Okay.
Ellie in the Federal School, pretty boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't
need it.
Didn't appreciate any of it at all. We know how not relevant it is to who she is as a character now. Like, it's where she's come from, you know, but it doesn't describe how she is, and it describes a relationship with someone who's only important in this episode, I feel like. It's got the basis for a good episode. I think it came in at a weird point, but I feel like a lot of moments are really distracting, and I feel like a lot of it really, some moments of it piss me off.
Okay.
Right? So they've really set up that they need to be quiet. They need to be like super, super careful walking around this city. And it's the first time we get to see an active, like, Fedra controlled city apart from Boston in the first episode. They run around the place, they drink on a rooftop, they're like carrying around like crazy people throughout the whole city, and then they go to the mall, light the whole fucking thing up with a glass ceiling.
But they can't see it from the outside.
But they can't see it from the outside for some reason. That's not how malls work. The whole thing is lit up like a Christmas tree in a completely dark city, which we saw.
At night.
And it's super fucking bright. And they are drinking, and it's the dumbest shit. It is. I do not buy it that was a good idea. I understand that Riley's a Firefly now. She's like, fuck Fedra, we do what we want. You know, it's good for kids and teenagers to have that kind of like rebellious phase and do that. But you've grown up in this world where so much shit is dangerous, you know, and Riley's like, yeah, I've been sleeping here for days, you know, like, it's totally fine, you know, I'm looking after these bombs, like, it's all totally chill. In fact, it comes out of nowhere, you know, super random. Didn't land.
Contrived.
The whole thing is a bit contrived. Okay. The whole thing pissed me off with them not being quiet enough or concerned enough. Fedra didn't feel like a real threat in this episode at all. Neither really did the Infected, because they make so much noise until the point where it like comes up.
Okay.
You know? There were some really nice moments, Street Fighter bits, their relationship blossoming. You know, there were good moments for Ellie and development for her character, which I really enjoyed. Overall, the episode was a massive distraction in the same way that I think you felt about episode 3. Don't think it should have come in at this point. Would have preferred it as maybe the penultimate episode.
So it's your least favourite episode of the series?
I think it is my least favourite episode. It landed the least for me, and it's not because I don't like Ellie. She's grown on me by this point. This episode gives her some good development. Just don't think a lot of the content of this episode was cool. I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't super necessary. I kind of didn't feel as much, and Riley and her like getting bit in the end didn't hit you emotionally as much. Didn't emotionally resonate with me at all.
Yep, that's fair. Look, I get what you're saying. I agree with a few of the points. I think they should have got to the mall faster. The logic kind of issues are slightly problematic as well. I didn't like the first 15 minutes. For example, the flashbacks with the Fedra stuff, again, not fully necessary. But with that being said, I think this is probably one of the more consistent episodes for me, and dare I say, one of my favorites.
Whoa.
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of the Left Behind DLC.
How much of it is adapted from the DLC? Like, how much of it is actually, like, is it the whole thing? Do they take creative liberties with it in this episode? So
the DLC is like maybe 2.5 hours long, and this is an hour-long episode of television. The DLC also intercuts with Ellie trying to scavenge supplies for Joel while he's unconscious. So it does take place narratively at the same point as the game, even though the DLC is something you play like after you finish the game. They trim it down because they remove a lot of those gameplay elements. Like in the game, you're playing like with like water pistols, for example, or you're playing in the arcade, but the arcade doesn't work, so they use their imagination, which I think was a lot cooler, but less visually stimulating for like a TV show. It works better in a game. But yeah, they basically adapt like the story as is, right? So the story is at its core the same. I was just a big fan of the slower pace. Like, it felt like the rest of the show feels like one big speed run where we're trying to get from plot point to plot point. Here, everything just slows down, and I needed this. You know, it came at a a nice moment for me. I think that the actress playing Riley, Storm Reed, who's also in Euphoria as Zendaya's, I forget her name, Rue's younger sister, who's played by Zendaya. She's a fantastic young up-and-coming actress, and I think she is fantastic as Riley.
She does well.
Yeah,
she does well in this role.
She outdoes Bella.
Yeah, in the episode. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, she's way more interesting to watch.
Yeah,
you know.
I think she killed it. Like, knowing Riley from the game, I think she maybe was better.
Okay.
And that's one of the very, very few instances I'm saying something's better from the game.
That's so interesting because I can't speak on it. I haven't seen.
Yeah, at worst, she's equal. She does her justice.
Okay.
I think she has incredible chemistry with Bella and gets Bella to give one of her better performances if we're looking at like an episode by episode basis. I think Bella is really solid in this episode, whereas in some episodes I find her to be a little inconsistent, especially early on. I did find some of the scenes a bit clunky, like we mentioned. I think it's a bit slow at the start. I do find that some of the moments, they were almost verbatim from the DLC as well. They didn't quite nail the emotion. I agree with that 100%. Mm-hmm. I was not left wrecked like I was from the DLC in the game. Emotionally, they didn't quite pull it off. And again, the bit with the infected felt super contrived. That was a big difference from the game. In the game, they kind of stumble on, I forget exactly, but they stumble on this area and then basically a bunch of infected are alerted and they get chased down by them and they just make it out, but they find out that they've been bitten.
That would have been cooler.
Yeah, I agree. Even with all of those problems, for me, this is what I wanted the show to be a bit more about. I wanted the direction of the show to be a bit slower and more character focused. And we get so much character development from this episode for Ellie. It's insane. Like, the rest of the show kind of neglects it because it's big about like Joel and Ellie's relationship, but we don't ever really see Ellie not with Joel outside of the pilot. So this is a moment where we get to see her in a whole new light, and I really like the character elements that we had here. I liked their relationship. I really liked that kind of childhood chemistry that they had where it's like, yeah, there's a romance going on, but it's kind of unspoken, and it's a really strong friendship and bond, but there's something more there, and the fact that them getting bitten, we're robbed of, what could have been. I personally am just a huge fan of the story. I don't think they pulled it off quite like they did with the DLC, because the DLC for me is like a perfect 10. But I really like the story from the DLC, and we get the same story here. I think this episode could have been better if, like I said, they removed some of those logic flaws that we kind of had, and then they get to the mall a little bit faster, find that opening 10 to 15 minutes to be a bit slow.
Cut some of that Fedra shit.
And I would have liked some inner cutting between Ellie trying to keep Joel alive.
Yeah, me too.
I think if we got 5 or so scenes, just short scenes, right, where she's fucking dragging his body through the snow, then we cut back to this. And then we go back and she's fucking smashing down the door because it's fucking locked, right? And then she's like, okay, fuck, what do I do? Those moments, intercut more frequently throughout, would have been a stronger episode for me.
For sure.
I did find, like, even though the ending didn't quite land for me emotionally, like, it was still really good. They have that moment where they could shoot themselves, right? And if Ellie shoots herself, there's no The Last of Us.
Yeah.
Right? And
she'll never know she's immune.
And having that context that she is immune, like, seeing them make that decision where it's like, no, they don't want to go through with it. They want to soak up every last second with each other. And then also the fact that they don't show Riley turning and Ellie, because we know that Ellie kills her.
Does that happen in the game? Do you see it?
I don't believe they show that in the game, but I think it's quite cool that they don't show that. We as the audience can figure out what happens next.
Of course. It's not necessary.
Time passes, Riley turns, Ellie doesn't. Ellie has to kill her best friend, who she's also in love with. Just the emotional weight, like, because throughout both the game and the previous episodes, Ellie alludes to, having to kill someone, and we're like, okay, like, what's this situation about? And to see this play out like it did, is fantastic. Like I said with episode 3, having a dedicated episode to this without really showing much of, like, the present time is a bit of a halt, especially when there's only 2 episodes after this to wrap up the rest of the story. But I do not believe that is this episode's fault, and I give it a pass for that. I think it is the problem of the previous 6 episodes for fucking up the pacing of the series. Unlike episode 3, which is dealing with a minor character that really doesn't have any prevalence to the plot, this does, because this is a essential part of Ellie's character that I think was really important to show.
It's wild that I liked episode 3 more than this because, like we were saying, it is much more of a distraction and a detraction from the story. It doesn't develop, episode 3 doesn't develop Ellie or Joel in any kind of way, but this episode does. It does give a lot of context to Ellie. I just think that what we see of Ellie is not too much different from who she is as a person now. Like when we see her in the current moment, she's not acting too much different in this flashback before she loses Riley. You'd expect that to have some kind of massive emotional impact on her, but apart from one or two throwaway lines in episode 4, I think, or 5, like it's not really a big part of her character. You know, it's brought up a few times, not enough to be impactful. I don't think she's different. If she was like crazy, like energetic and different in this episode, and then because of what happened with Riley, she was a bit more like Joel, she was a bit more like different in her demeanor, it would have been better.
Yep.
Saying that I don't enjoy this episode as much as the rest of the episodes in the season doesn't mean I think this is a bad episode. I still enjoyed it to an extent. I just don't think, for me personally, it was as strong as it could have been, or as strong as a like side story episode as episode 3 was.
Yeah, that's fair. Look, this is the lowest rated episode of the entire series, and I understand why people don't like it. For me, for my personal taste, like I just love this story so much. So getting to see it make its way into the TV show was just something I really appreciated. But let's move on to the penultimate episode. Episode 8, When We Are in Need. When I got to this episode, I'm like, what the fuck have they done? What have they done? There are 2 episodes left. And you're going to wrap up the entire rest of the show. And I actually watched the episode the day before episode 9 was released.
Right.
And that was the
So
same.
you're still catching up there?
Yeah. And I like, it was just before the show was ending. And that was when I found out that episode 9 had the shortest runtime of the series. And I'm just like, what the fuck is happening? What are you guys doing? Like, we're in episode 8. For reference, I think what the events that happen in episode 8 and 9 should have been 4 episodes, and we get 2.
Yeah, episode 8 is in the game one of the like a massively long section.
Absolutely.
Like a big section, and it's very impactful because it is quite a big long part of the game.
Yeah.
And it is kind of glossed over in this episode in a lot of areas. Coming from the previous episode, I actually quite like this one.
Look, I didn't dislike this episode at all, but here's my problem. We get 2 episodes dedicated to fucking Kathleen, and you give me 1 for David.
Yeah.
Where's the logic in that? David is one of the best fucking video game antagonists, like, ever. He is fucking incredible in the game. And the stuff with Ellie and David is fantastic. The stakes with Joel being basically on his fucking deathbed.
Yeah.
Right? This whole section of the game, like, this point onwards to the end of the game is fucking flawless, right? The whole game is flawless, but this in particular, like, this is some of the best fucking moments we get from the game.
It's quite memorable.
And it should have been so much better. But let's start with the positives. So, Bella Ramsey in this episode, best performance of the series by far.
Yeah, I agree. She did really, really
She pulled off Ellie the best in this episode to the other episodes.
Yeah.
I think she gives a really strong performance. Again, like, I'm not fully sold. I don't think she absolutely fucking hit it out of the park, nailed it. But I think she was really good in this episode in particular. Whereas others, I found her to be a little bit inconsistent.
She really came into her own in this episode as her version of Ellie.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like, it's the same story that we get from the games. They don't make any crazy big deviations, and the story from the games is fucking amazing, right? So it's still really solid in that regard. I like some nice little subtle moments where they show, you know, like the young girl eating her dad without knowing it.
Oh, that was great.
That was a really cool
I fucking love that. I didn't pick up on it until later on in the episode, like when it was like almost explicitly explained to us.
Yeah.
When I realized, I fucking was like, whoa!
Yeah.
It was good. It was really well done and crafted in that movie.
For sure. And there's a lot of, you know, moments that I really appreciate. Like, I think a lot of the interactions between Ellie and David, I won't say they're stronger than as strong as in the game, but they do it justice. But there were some elements that I just didn't like. Firstly, they threw in some religious elements for David's group, and it was just completely unnecessary. It turns David from this really kind of like interesting, unique kind of villain into a religious, post-apocalyptic caricature.
Yeah, they kind of brought him to be like this kind of like God craze, like he was convinced he was some kind
Yeah,
religious
I've seen
savior.
I've seen this shit so many times.
We've seen crazy cult religious zealous shit before.
Yeah, I've seen these fucking monologues of the Bible and shit, like, to open the episode. I don't need to see it again. You take something that is original and fucking works in the game, and you throw these elements in for no reason, and it detracts from it for me.
Can I say, though, I think it was in part to what they were trying to do with David in this episode, with setting him up to be like a likable guy in the beginning. You know, he's the leader, he's the pastor, he's preaching to everyone.
Yeah.
You know, he meets Ellie for the first time, he's a math teacher, he's really charismatic with her, he likes her. He sends off Troy Baker's character.
James,
yeah.
So it's like his offsider.
Yeah.
Played by Troy Baker, who plays Joel from the video games.
Yep. And he does really well here as well.
Yeah, he was great.
Very different role.
Completely different. He was really solid. In fact, I was way more interested in him than David.
Yeah, kind of me too. But I did like what they did with David and setting him up in that way. And then eventually, you really feel he's slowly, slightly, every scene he's in, getting a little bit more loosey-goosey, a little bit more crazy, a little bit more fucked up, until eventually it comes to his final scene and he's, fully gone. Yeah. Not as good as the game, though.
No.
But I do like the way they crafted it. Because I did like David at the beginning. Despite, whatever, religious guy, that kind of stuff, he was likable in the beginning. I liked him. Didn't like him by the end of it at all. I like how they paced that and set that up throughout the episode. And I think that's probably why they made the religious change.
Yeah, so I agree completely. I think the way they executed it was fine. My problem is this needed to be 2 episodes, not 1.
Yeah, they could have expanded upon it for sure.
They completely rushed the beginning and end. The middle was okay, but we needed it a lot more set up with Ellie surviving on her own. Like in the game, we get that moment where she's hunting with the bow and arrow.
Yep.
I guess I just didn't want to make Bella learn how to fucking shoot a bow and arrow, which is
fine.
Which is problematic.
In Game of Thrones.
Yeah, well, it's kind of problematic because the bow is like a huge, like the bow and knife is Ellie.
Yeah.
The little knife that she has that she grabs and the bow is essential to her character in terms of like a gameplay loop. And it's completely omitted from, I guess they have the knife, but the bow is completely omitted from the show.
That's true.
Don't know why they did that. I think that's a missed opportunity. But her going out and hunting, I wanted a bit more of that. I wanted a bit more of like the interactions with Joel. And then when she runs across David, they needed to draw that out longer, and they needed that moment from the game where the infected come and they have to work together to keep each other alive. Mm-hmm. Because without that, we don't have a reason to trust David, right? And then when we have that moment where we find out, like, after they've been through that and he pulls the fucking gun and she'd be like, what the fuck, you had a gun like this whole time? And then he basically saves her life, more or less, in that gameplay encounter that we get. That missing was huge for me because that's such a great moment from, like, it's tense, it's, this new mysterious character, but he's helping a character we care about, and Ellie's desperate, she needs medication. So it just helps the narrative unfold a lot easier rather than kind of rushing through it like we do in this episode. And then especially to like the back end of the episode is just super rushed. Like the stuff
does feel rushed.
The stuff with Joel, it needed to be slower, you know, it just needed to be. Even an episode and a half would have worked.
Just based on him purely instead of trying to shoehorn it into the end when we're trying to deal with the Ellie and David stuff.
Yeah.
I did like the stuff with Joel, like him like being all like commando, kind of like really like quietly.
It's the first fucking time we get actual Joel from the game. Like we needed more of this throughout.
Killing,
yeah,
good stuff.
I fucking loved it.
It was good shit. Like it was done really well, and it felt.
They did it justice for sure.
Early on though, like you were talking about with that scene and the tension between David first meeting Ellie, they do what I think they build fake tension. So when she's walking around the forest, like after she's hunting the deer, she hears clicking in the forest. She literally hears the audio from a clicker, like in that forest, and then runs into David and James. So they built up a layer of fake tension to have it kind of like dismayed by this and kind of throw you off, and it felt unnecessary because they've shown us that they're good at building tension, and they didn't do that in the way that they've done it previously.
Actually, I'm going to disagree with you there. I think that the show in general falls off a cliff after episode 2 in terms of tension. I think the first 2 episodes are excellent.
Episode 2 is my prime example of tension in the show.
After that, the tension's gone. Think about it. Episode 3, no tension, right? Episode 4, very little tension, right? Episode 5, poor tension again with the sniper and the execution of that whole action sequence.
Right.
Episode 6, again, like I was saying, by having too many men on the horses, it's just not as tense. And that's really the only one tense moment that happens the entire episode, right?
But it does work as tension.
Episode 7, they even fuck up the tension in there by making the mall feel super safe and just one kind of coming out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
We're in episode 8 now. I've just named all of these episodes. There's no fucking tension in any of them.
I do think in episode 6 they do have the tension with the writers. We do disagree on that. I think that is another good moment of tension.
But even then, it's a 3-minute scene.
Yeah.
In a 60-minute episode.
In episodes 1 and 2, they do show us that they can do it.
Yeah, I agree, but they forget about it.
They do forget about it.
Including in, like, this episode should have been more tense, and it's because we're not getting the infected.
It's also because we're not getting as much time as we should be.
And that's the problem I had, and this is why I'm so down on episode 3, is because episode 3 detracts from this episode.
Even if they had 10 episodes in this show, in this season, episode 3 would have made more sense. You know, they could have spent time doing other things. There's that whole bit.
Would have made it a bit more forgivable, but I really think the magic number was probably 14.
14, I think, is too much.
I
think it's too much.
Well, not when you're having 2 standalone episodes.
You could include the whole dam section. You know, you could build on Tommy's character more.
Yeah.
You could build up to the township.
These last 2 episodes should have been 4.
Yeah, and they should have had longer runtimes because they have longer runtimes too.
Yep.
Episode 9 being the shortest of the season was weird.
Mind-blowing. But I've got some issues again with like the direction and execution, especially with like the back half. So I love a lot of the Joel stuff.
Yep.
Like how he's fucking on his deathbed but somehow finds something to muster up, and you know his survival instinct basically kicks in, and then we see him torturing. It's maybe like a bit too short of a time from him going from like basically not able to fucking do anything in bed to, you know, trekking through the snow and all of that shit, basically taking on and strangling. Like, he's been shot in the guts, but he's got enough strength to fucking strangle someone from behind.
He's been bedridden.
He should have had a gun.
Yeah.
Ellie should have left the pistol with him that she stole, right, in episode 3.
He has it.
He should have fucking shot the guy, not strangled him from behind with a shotgun.
I guess he was trying to be quiet.
I understand that, but he shouldn't have been quiet. He should have had to fight them off in a hard way, you know?
Look, I don't know how penicillin works. I'm allergic to penicillin, but apparently it makes you super strong,
superhuman,
super okay after being infected and on your deathbed for days.
And that's why the pacing is such a problem, right? This needed to be a bit slower and a bit more gradual than what we got.
I don't care though, it's cool. I like the scene, you know?
But here's my problem. So, okay, he goes and tracks down Ellie to, like, after getting the information from the guys that he tortured and killed, he tracks her down to this settlement, right? There's a snowstorm when he's walking through it. Mm-hmm. In the game, there's a crazy big snowstorm. There's only a snowstorm when he arrives, and then they forget about it. It's not seen in the any later exterior shoots.
True.
Huge continuity issue. He gets there, and well, let's talk from Ellie's point of view first. So I like the execution with Ellie killing James. I think that was fucking sick. I liked the encounters with David. I think this is where the David stuff worked the best. I liked Ellie's performance as well, like Bella's performance as Ellie. I was vibing with all of this, right? And then when she frees herself, this is where David, for me, he just went a little bit too far. Like, it was just a little bit too silly. Like, for example, Ellie throws, like, that stick that was on fire or whatever, and it, like, lights up the curtain, and he just looks back and is just like, oh.
I'll ignore that. When
he eventually does get to her, tries to rape her while the place is burning down. Like,
I guess he doesn't expect anyone to come in while it's on fire.
But they show, like, in the fucking episode, like, the place is on fire basically completely when they leave, which is a minute later. Like, I kind of liked the ambiguity a bit more from the game, where it wasn't 100% clear that he was a pedophile. It was more so just like, he probably is a pedophile.
Right.
Whereas in the show, it's just like, yeah, he's a pedophile. But the fact that, like, he doesn't put out the fucking fire, the whole townspeople, like, they introduced throughout the whole beginning of the episode, where the fuck are they?
They disappear.
They just don't care. They don't care that this place is burning down. He doesn't care that the place is burning down.
There's a whole township there. Characters that we've seen introduced. Ones that Joel...
Forgotten about.
They went after Joel. Like, they are the important ones, you know. But we've got that little girl who, you know, has to eat her father at one point, which is... Great moment. That was one of my favorite moments in the
Could have been a cool moment where Joel kills that kid. Because Joel killed her dad, which we kind of glossed over, but like the execution of Joel getting injured as well is just way less cool in the show than the games. Like him falling, I know they couldn't do it
at the university.
Yeah, like him falling out of a fucking rooftop and landing on like this metal fucking thing sticking up. And, I feel that in my fucking soul every time that happens.
I remember.
Whereas him just getting jumped by the goons, the execution of that was super lame. Didn't like that at all.
Also,
but anyway,
I don't know if you've seen the video of that, but they fucking ride away on the fakest horse I've ever seen. It looks crazy.
I didn't notice.
I will send it to you after we finish talking.
But even like talking about tension, even the execution of them getting jumped by those 3 guys was just nowhere near as tense as it should have been. So we could have had like, they have this setup with like the daughter. For what? Like, if she confronted Joel and Joel had to kill a child that's somewhat comparable to Sarah and Ellie, that could have been a really cool moment, but they just didn't have the time for it. The townspeople were completely forgotten about after we just spent, 20 minutes fucking setting it up? Why not just have David be some fucking random ranger, you know?
Yeah, some random, raider guy or some shit.
Exactly right.
Thing. They walk out of the, burnt down, restaurant or hall, wherever they are. I think it was a restaurant in the game, but they walk out of there, and it's just them. Yep. None of the townspeople are around.
And the weather's clear.
Wow, what happened in there? That's crazy. They're fucking fucking
Joel
gone.
doesn't have to kill anyone. All he does is discover that they're cannibals, but there's no obstacles for him in his way. And one of the biggest changes that I don't like, and apparently it was done for safety reasons, which is just mind-blowing to me, because who gives a fuck about actor safety? In the game, Joel finds Ellie, he's just too late, and she's just started hacking away at killing David. Like, it's just kind of perfect timing, but also unlucky timing. He runs to her, he grabs her from behind, she fucking is still freaking out and doesn't know what's happening, and he just holds her and says, calm down, it's me, I'm here, it's alright. That is so much more impactful than what we get in the TV show, where she's already fucking gone too far, she's crossed that point. It's not Joel desperately coming in and just being a little bit too late to try and protect her, but still actually protecting her from the dark atrocities of this world. It's no, he doesn't protect her at all. He's too late and doesn't land for me at all compared to the game.
It's obviously way better in the game. We agree on that, I think, for sure. I do think Bella's performance here, when she does kill David...
She's great.
It's great. It's amazing. Some people have said it's way too much. Like, she overdid it here. I really liked it. I thought it was good. I think the moment directly after it with her and Joel as well is quite good. Wish that had more impact on the next episode on the show overall.
I agree.
Because apart from Ellie being weirdly despondent in the next episode, it's not really a problem. And it should be. It should be.
Look, I like the episode overall. It's got a lot going for it.
Yeah.
It was just too rushed for me.
Fair.
And then we move on to the final episode, which, look, heading into this, knowing it was the shortest runtime, I knew I wasn't going to like it. And spoiler, I did not like this episode.
Okay.
I didn't dislike it. I think it was fine. I just didn't like the pacing.
Mm-hmm.
So we start off with this really cool scene that I did fucking like. Didn't love the execution of it, but I do love the fact that we got to see Ashley Johnson in a cameo, who plays Ellie from the game, playing Ellie's mum.
I loved it. I thought it was awesome.
I wanted more flashbacks like this.
Yeah. Like, they forget about it up until they bring it back in this episode. It's a great role for Ashley Johnson.
Yeah.
Sounds just like Ellie.
She is incredible.
She does great.
Her
She does a really good
so
job.
good.
Yeah. A bit of a logic, like, kind of concern, you know, with all of that going on, with the one fucking infected coming in.
So this is one of my biggest problems, is time and time again they fuck up the execution and direction of the show. The idea on paper is brilliant. So just imagine this, right? So obviously Anna is with the Fireflies, Marlene and a few other groups, but their numbers are kind of dwindling, right? What if they've had to leave pregnant Anna behind in this house and to go and get supplies or something, and obviously they can't take a pregnant woman with them? What if she just wakes up in the fucking middle of the night and she hears these like fucking infected smashing at the fucking door and shit, and she's looking out and she's seeing like, you know, like 4 or 5 of them, like too many that she can deal with. She doesn't have a fucking gun, she only has a knife, she's pregnant, she can barely fucking get around, like she's heavily pregnant. That would be so much more tense than her just randomly like waddling through the fucking woods and apparently being chased by an infected that can't catch her somehow. And then like she makes it to the door, just shuts the door and heads upstairs, and then we hear it break in. Like, we didn't need any of that. We should have just started with her like waking up in the middle of the night to these fucking noises, and we see the infected like they're trying to break in, and she's desperately trying to fucking defend herself, and you know she's doing all these smart things like trying to barricade the windows, and then one gets in and she takes care of it, then another one, so she retreats upstairs, right? And it's really fucking desperate, intense. We don't know what's going on. Like, who is this character? She finally fucking has that final one which she does manage to fend off, and she gets bit. Then Marlene comes back and recognizes like the haul of fucking dead bodies of the infected. That would have been so much better.
That would have been.
Again, they butchered the execution. It was super clunky.
What we got was fine. I liked what we got. But you're right, when you say it like that, it would have been easier for them just to be in the house the whole time instead of running through the woods. I think it's because they wanted to show it was the farmhouse.
Yeah, it wasn't scary. And it wasn't tense, and it should have been. In saying that, I do really appreciate being able to see Ashley, you know, get a chance to have her cameo, because I really, you know,
I really loved what this said about Marlene's relationship with Ellie, especially coming in with this episode.
Yeah,
it added. We knew from the game that Marlene knew.
It's more explicit, getting to see that moment.
Yeah, and her emotional reaction around having to put down her mother after being bitten, stuff like that. It really works for me. It adds a lot of depth to their characters and the characterization, and the ultimate choice that Marlene makes in this episode. It could have been done better. Yep. You're right.
And then we head back into the present time, and we get, like you mentioned, those kind of slower moments where Ellie, for the first time, is a completely different character.
Yeah.
She's dejected, she's depressed, she's traumatized, she's fucking out of it. And Joel is the one who who's trying to lighten the mood, who's asking for the pun jokes, who's trying to make things a bit lighthearted, and he's talking optimistically, saying like, oh, maybe I can teach you this, or we should do this after. And it's just a complete flip. I really like it in the TV show. They don't nail it as well as they do in the game, simply because we just don't have enough time, and the game,
spend with them
and the game's slower, and we get them sprinkled out rather than in the show. It's kind of just like two big scenes where we get all of that in these moments.
Yeah.
But again, I do really like actually what we got. I think it was probably some of the best like characterization and chemistry between these two characters.
It's good, but it feels a bit off to me in some of those lines and interactions between them, because it's a bit rushed. We spent the last 2 episodes with Joel like injured, not talking at all, and we don't see them interact until the end of episode 8.
Yeah.
So it comes from a little bit like way too long ago, and we know that they have spent time developing their characters and making them closer this season, so it does kind of work to some effect. But Joel feels like a totally different person in this episode, especially since we saw him torture and kill people in the last episode.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, forget about my trauma. Like, I'm going to be the funny joke guy. I'm going to be the Ellie guy in this episode. And I understand why he's doing it. I understand, like...
They probably took it a tiny bit too far. I think the games were perfect. And because it's so slow in the games, where we're just getting them sprinkled rather than crammed into like one moment, it just works a lot more organically.
Yeah. So I didn't dislike it. I like seeing that. I like the interactions they have. It just felt a little bit off to me and was a little bit weird.
One of my favorite scenes, I'd say, that's different or unique from the games is actually that moment where Joel opens up to Ellie basically for the first time and admits that he tried to kill himself after Sarah's death. Basically tells Ellie like, you're the reason I keep going.
This was great because it was set up in a previous episode. He talks about the scar on his forehead being given to him by someone
which
who
isn't
missed
even
the shot.
fucking noticeable. Like you would think
you barely see the scar.
Yeah, why didn't they make that more noticeable throughout the whole show?
Especially when it was at point blank range as well. You'd think it'd be a bit... It's fine. You see it sometimes. It's okay. It's not a massive problem.
Yeah.
But it was set up there, and he does talk about like a very subtle kind of way of like, I was the guy who missed.
Yeah.
It's very good writing.
Great performance, great writing, great chemistry between them.
Good reactions.
Yeah. I think this was one of the best executions of something that was a bit original.
Yeah. It was very well done. I really enjoyed that. And I think it adds to Joel's character a bit more as well. Because it wasn't something that necessarily was a part of the game and wasn't like talked about, even though there's a whole time skip of 20 years.
Yep.
Could be possible, but it was nice to hear it and see it explicitly done.
Yep.
Also, Joel telling Ellie in this moment that she is essentially the reason why he's like wanting to go on and keep living.
Yep.
It's really good, and they did that in a way that wasn't explicit either.
Yeah, like it was explicit for the audience, but it wasn't like in a bad way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a nice touch to have this moment leading into what happens next, where basically they get hit with a flashbang.
Yep.
Joel gets knocked out, Ellie gets taken away, he wakes up in a bed. What the fuck's happening right now? Here we get basically the final 30 minutes of the show, and I've got to say, I did not like this final 30 minutes.
I kind of agree with you.
Ooh, I thought you would have loved this episode.
It didn't land with me as well as the game did. The game did it so well and it shocked you so much. And it was presented so well, and it was one of the hardest parts of the game trying to get through it. It felt really grueling and difficult and dangerous.
Yeah.
We've barely seen the Fireflies in the show. You know, we haven't seen Marlene since like episode fucking 2, maybe even 1.
1, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think she's into it at all.
Yeah, so she's barely been in the show, apart from the start of this episode, Nicole open as well. It just doesn't, Joel's decision to do it.
How they get captured as well bothers me a bit as well. I get they couldn't do like the whole water action sequence, but that was a big moment in the game. Like Joel fucking saves Ellie's life. He brings her back to life, and then fucking they come out of nowhere and he gets knocked in the head. But it was a bit more like they just went through this fucking crazy near life or death experience, comes out of it, Ellie barely survives, and then the Fireflies almost come out of fucking nowhere. Even though you could argue like it felt a bit out of nowhere, I think it just works so much better than them just trekking through and then they sneak up behind and throw a fucking flashbang. Like that was super lame for me.
We could have had the moment like where they spoke about Joel's suicide attempt before that happened, like before the water scene. They still should have included it, or some scene of Joel having to save Ellie's life.
didn't have the time. That's the problem.
I know, but they could have extended this episode. Like, no one would have been
sure.
mad if the final episode was an hour, over.
And again, no infected in this episode.
Yeah, they kind of forget about that. Yeah, that did bother me a bit as well. I do think at its core, though, The Last of Us is a story about people. It's not so much focused on the infected, despite it being a massive part of the world.
I agree, but then don't open the entire series talking about the fungus.
Yeah, it's like they set it up for the show more than it was actually.
And don't establish it in the first 2 episodes that these encounters with the infected are going to be a commonplace thing if you're just going to go away from it later on.
So yeah, Joel wakes up in the hospital. He finds out from Marlene that she's going to kill Ellie because she's the key to saving humanity. Ultimately, it's a choice for the greater good, but everyone thinks that Ellie should be given the choice.
So they make a pretty big change that I actually spoke to you before this episode aired. I told you that I thought they were going to make a big change from the game and go down a certain route, and they did exactly that. Right. So in the game, it is very similar to what we get in the TV show.
Yeah.
But I would say the game is incredibly great. Like, there are tons and tons of like video essays and people discussing about, did Joel do the right thing, right? And there's all these different arguments. You've got, oh, well, the Fireflies would never have been able to successfully make a cure because they didn't know what they were doing. Yeah. They were too disorganized. They were getting killed off left, right, and center. They're incompetent. Their scientists wouldn't have been able to pull it off. And even if they did get a cure, how are they going to distribute it? The world's way too far gone for it to actually make a difference. They're fucking blindly relying on hope that's just completely unrealistic. Then you've got the whole issue with Ellie. Ellie was basically drugged without her consent and had no option in the matter whatsoever. And then you have the whole issue with some of the background information that's not explicit in the games at all, but it's background stuff. You find some audio recordings. You actually find out that Ellie is not the first. There were dozens of people just like Ellie before that they had tried on and failed every single fucking time. Yep. Now, Joel doesn't know this information, and even if he does, it doesn't matter, right? It's
he's still
Joel is always going to make that choice, but having these extra layers of grey make that decision worth debating, and that's why it has been debated for fucking like years and years, over a decade after the games come out. People are still talking about that ending because you have all these elements of grey that also boil down to just a person who can't let go of his daughter.
And you really feel like that.
Yeah.
When you're playing it. When I played that for the first time, it went through that experience, I was like, wow, that was fucking insane. Did he do the right thing?
Yeah.
Was it the right choice? Because they build up the Fireflies as a bit more of this heroic kind of group.
Yeah.
And you kind of feel like they might be doing the right thing in that moment. And Joel makes a really fucked up decision to kill all these people.
But in saying that, although he makes the fucked up decision, after spending like 15 hours playing this game and having all of these interactions with Ellie, I don't know about, like, obviously this is like a thing that's on a personal level. Like, some people didn't like the ending and thought Joel was just straight up in the wrong. I was team Joel.
Yeah.
As a gamer playing this moment, I was like, yes, look, he's making the right decision. I buy it from a personal level because I don't want Ellie to die.
Yeah.
I'm emotionally invested in this, and I also, on a logical point of view, don't think that the way they're going about it, basically fucking prepping her for surgery immediately and going to do the surgery that's going to kill her definitely without studying her for a bit longer or trying to see if they can use her blood for anything. Like, they don't do any experiments, they rush into it. He was making objectively the right decision in the game, and also morally, I think, an understandable decision that even if you disagree personally, you can understand. The TV show removes all of that grey and makes it black and white.
And you said that was going to happen.
Yeah, and it did. Because the Fireflies were not given any kind of representation in the TV show outside of like the first episode.
We've not seen them for 8 episodes at this point.
The fact that they had experimented on others was taken away. Also, Neil Druckmann added in and said that them saying that they would get the cure was 100% truthful and guaranteed.
Yeah.
Which is, I know he's the creator of the show, but he's wrong, right? He's wrong in this situation. It's a terrible, terrible change. And the reason why they're doing all of these things is because of The Last of Us 2. Now, I won't go into the reasons why, but basically, The Last of Us 2, the game goes in a completely different direction with Joel's character and makes out that the decisions he makes at the end of this game were different, that they were black and white, like they've been presented in the TV show, and not grey, like they actually were presented in the game. And for me, it takes away all of those complexities and just makes it so much worse.
Something for me about the morally grey decision is I think it helps part 2 a little bit better, honestly. I know they presented as more black and white in part 2, but that kind of opinion is something you can formulate based on the perspectives of Ellie and Abby. You know, you get that kind of point of view.
It absolutely helps part 2, but unanimously, like, the diehard fans did not like part 2 because of this decision. So what do? Do you change the ending of the first game that everyone loves, right, to help make up for a game that's super controversial? Or do you change the second game like they should and reincorporated these moments of grey and had that moment where Joel actually defends himself a bit more when having a conversation with Ellie later on? For me, I don't know. I think they made the wrong call.
This, I think, sets up season 2, knowing that it's going to be based on part 2 really well, but it does take away from what makes the ending of the first game unique. You're right. That morally grey decision, you come out of that whole level, that whole moment, feeling like, was that the right thing? There's debate, there's doubt surrounding it. There's none of that here. You're right. It's purely Joel is making the right decision because it's what the writers have told him to do.
Yep. And they completely ignore the fact, like, that the Fireflies were actually delusional in this moment. And even if...
They presented as fact that they can make a cure.
And even if it was, and they could make the cure, they don't even have Joel bring up the argument with Marlene.
Yeah.
Like, this is a moment where, like, even the game kind of rushes this a bit. And I was thinking, like, oh, the TV show, maybe they could have, like, a fucking 20-minute scene with Joel and Marlene going back and forth, debating, arguing the morality of this decision. And Joel saying, well, she should get to decide. Why are you rushing this? Like, all of the things that we're thinking as a player, like, why the fuck do you have to do this, like, right now, right? And talking it through a bit. But no, we get the rushed version that's even worse than the game. I'm not saying that the game's bad. The game makes sense for being rushed because it's the climax and it's a game. We're playing it. Whereas the TV show, that's where you should take your time. And I don't know, didn't land for me at all. And another thing that didn't land for me at all was the execution of Joel's basically killing spree. The fact that
it wasn't visually entertaining.
It was terrible. I'll go as far to say it was terrible.
I wouldn't say it's terrible.
I think it was. They went for
mind-numbing.
They went for the cheap fucking route of having a montage.
Yeah.
And it felt like I was watching fucking Terminator.
It looked like action schlock.
I hated it. Just imagine, like... The way that they should have gone about executing this scene, in my opinion, is something akin to, like, a Children of Men style long shot, right? So Joel gets escorted out, and then he has this moment where he sees an opportunity, right? Where a moment of weakness, and he fucking takes it. And this is where we need handheld shit. We need slow, no cutting, following Joel. We need brutality. We need the struggle. We need him getting into fucking one-on-one fistfights, but showing that nothing's gonna fucking stand in his way. We need him gunning down people that he's wounded. We need to see it slowly unfold. We don't need a quick little montage where he just basically goes from firing a shot, reloading, firing a shot, oh, this person surrendered, firing a shot, like...
It's also not what they've set up for Joel. Like,
it contradicts... what they contradicted from the game. Like, the game, he is this badass, and this scene makes kind of sense for it. I don't like the execution, but the logic behind him being able to kill, like, 10 armed people works in the game.
Yeah.
Actually, it doesn't work in the show, because they neglected showing that, because they're trying to play off this new version of Joel, where he's got PTSD. Where the fuck was the PTSD in this scene?
Yeah, he's, like, older, deaf, not as capable Joel in the show, and all of a sudden they're like, fuck that, we're doing it exactly the same. Here's Terminator Joel. And he goes through and he just... It's quick action schlock nonsense.
Yep.
And you're right. Something I think like a really like even just like an overwhelming amount of violence.
There was no suspense about can he get to Ellie in time.
Yeah.
There was no tension.
So confident.
There was no struggle.
Yeah.
They completely fucked it.
They should have had more struggle. They should have had moments where these soldiers were stronger than they were in the game, where one of them like actually almost kills him. Like it's a fight.
It should be Joel overcoming insurmountable odds because he won't fucking let anything stand between him saving Ellie's life, because he cannot lose another daughter.
And it should be harder for him as well because of the way they've set him up to be in the show.
Yeah.
Like it should be more difficult, and it is that moment of he's going to lose his Sarah, he's going to lose his daughter again, he's going to lose Ellie in this situation, so he's fighting against everything. It doesn't matter if he dies to get to that point. It doesn't come across that way at all.
For sure. Agree completely.
So yeah, I think it was executed poorly, and that was one of the worst parts for me, just because it was kind of glossed over. It felt very generic, and it wasn't done in a way that they've shown us they can do stuff in this show before.
The montage did not fit the style of the show
not at all.
whatsoever. Like, could you imagine, like, the execution of that akin to that scene from Children of Men?
Yeah, like a continuous take with, like, crazy violence and difficult, like situations that he's forced into with all these people. It would have felt better, and they could have extended the episode out to include that. And at the end of that, as a viewer, you would have felt like you were, as a player, like having gone through experiencing that all as Joel, like that massive fucking montage of having to kill all these people. It wouldn't have had to have been as long. They could have had it maybe be like 13 people or something, less than that, but it would have, like, been better.
And then they have the continuity error as well with, like, how he's carrying Ellie down to the basement. Don't know why Marlene is just randomly there. It was a problem I kind of had with the game a bit as well. It's kind of random that she's just kind of chilling down there by herself, and then he's carrying Ellie, and we don't see the gun in his hand, but then somehow he magically has the gun in his right hand, while, like, under her legs. Like, I don't know.
That was for them to hide it. Like, once again, good idea on paper, did not work in execution.
Yeah. The way they shot it needed to be a bit different to nail that. I really like Mel Dandridge's performance as Marlene. Like, she's the same actress that plays her from the game, and I really appreciated that. Like, she's great as Marlene.
Yeah.
And the final confrontation with Joel, even though I would have liked more of a moral debate, maybe not in this moment, but just in general for the episode, more of like a moral debate about who's right and wrong in this situation, and Joel actually fucking defending himself a little bit and justifying why he's doing it for the audience's sake, because as it's presented in the TV show, like, Joel just straight up does a terrible thing and there's no real argument to be had.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think the last episode really didn't stick the landing.
And it's interesting because it was something that had a few additional scenes on its own, but was pretty much taken from the game almost exactly like it is. They just cut away the more questionable moral choices. You know, they made it just, as you said, clear cut.
And we have that very famous final scene between him and Ellie. Look, I thought the scene was fine. It wasn't as good as the game, but I had no issue with it.
I say I liked it. Like, it's very similar, of course, to the game.
Bella does a good job. She doesn't nail it like Ashley did, but she was good. Yep. No issue with it.
Pedro did good.
But it just didn't quite fucking hit me like the game did. I don't know, and I think maybe it's the sound. I think it's the sourness of what happened before as well. Like, even like the bit with them in the car driving back is a bit clunkier than in the game as well. So.
Very expository. It's like, Joel, how did you come up with this 10-page excuse for what happened?
And Joel, like, acting the way he did, I don't know, it felt a bit clunky compared to the game where he plays it off like he thought it out a bit more. He's like, okay, this is what I'm going to tell her, and he delivers it with a bit more surety.
And Ellie feels more cut up about it in the game as well. She rolls over and is just crying to herself, and she does the same thing in the show, but it doesn't land as well. But yeah, that final, like, scene of them talking, I thought was quite good. I liked it in the show. You know, obviously I liked it better in the game because it felt more final, and we didn't know part 2 was coming out at that point when we played the game, so, like, we didn't know it was going to go anywhere. Obviously we know season 2 has been confirmed for the show, so we know that's coming, so it does feel a little bit less final, more like a season finale instead of what feels like the finale to a big event that you've spent time with these characters with. But it does set up season 2 quite nicely. It did make me think about all the things that I do like about part 2 and what's to come. I can't really fault it. I thought it was fine, the ending there, but maybe it's just because I liked it better than the horrible montage of shooting.
That's very fair. So let's move on to our favourite episode of the series. So for me personally, there wasn't really an episode that stood out as being my favourite. I found about 4 episodes to be all equally decent, but none quite blew me away. So what about yourself? Do you have a favourite?
I do. Don't know if you're going to agree with me here, but it's the one that I had the most enjoyment with. It's episode 2.
Episode 2?
Yes.
No argument with me.
Yeah. I really liked it. It was quite solid. Tess is great in it. Joel is great in it. Obviously, they set up some things that don't come back later in the show, but we didn't know that at that point. Bella Ramsey starts to come into Ellie a little bit better in this episode. So we started seeing her as a bit more like Ellie. And the tension that they achieve in the scene with the clickers and the way that it feels like as difficult as the game, feels like you're playing the game even though you're visually watching it, really well done. Some of the best example of tension I've seen in television, and that makes it my favourite episode.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Look, 2 is definitely up there for me. I'm probably going to have to go with the pilot. I don't even love the second half of the pilot, to be honest. Like, I just really enjoyed that first 40 minutes up until Sarah's death. I think they nailed that. That was really important for them to get right. And and they got it right. I loved the extra detail that we got with Sarah. I loved a lot of the setup that we got. And even though it's really not the heart and soul of the show, and this really shouldn't be my favorite episode, I just think I had less problems with this compared to some other episodes. Like, I really enjoyed episode 8, but there was some crazy big logic flaws, and they didn't get close to where the games were.
Yeah.
So in terms of like that comparison to the game, coming from someone who thinks the game's a masterpiece, 10 out of 10 game, I think episode 1 was the closest we got to that.
And I feel like part of it is the first episode as well, so the pacing issues weren't clear at that point.
Yep.
You spent a lot of time with that setup, with Sarah and the life before the fall, whereas episode 8 is quite short compared to the massively long first part of the pilot episode. So I agree with you, it's great. Those are probably, the first 2 episodes set up the show really well.
Yep.
And I think they were probably some of the strongest episodes of the season.
Yeah, as a fan of the games especially, I think general audience members will like those more plot heavy moments because they don't have the games to compare it to.
Yeah.
For example,
they're getting
like
that
episode
backstory.
8. Yeah, like they're just getting like the great story elements, whereas us having that comparison.
We've seen it. We know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and we can pick it apart a bit more because they're inferior representations, in my opinion, of those story beats. But
sometimes.
Most of the time. But let's move on to our final verdicts. So we'll start with yourself. A rating out of 100 for season 1 of HBO's The Last of Us.
Look, overall, I really liked this show. We were talking about video game adaptions before and how they've been in the past. This was a great example of it. While there are a lot of missteps, I had a great time watching it.
It's an enjoyable watch for sure.
I was excited to watch it every week. I haven't played the game for a while.
Yep.
I've seen a few clips here and there in the recent years, and I rewatched a bit of it. Obviously, I want to replay part 1 after watching the show. I think
so does fucking everyone.
Yeah, they really banked on that as well. I saw the prices got hiked up for the fucking game. But yeah, I loved it overall as a show, and I'm excited to see what they can do. They've really surprised me in some areas because I've been cautiously optimistic about some things, like getting excited for shows and stuff recently. I was skeptical about House of the Dragon when it came out, and then it turned out to be good in a lot of areas. So I was skeptical about this as well. Loved it overall.
Yep.
Lot of missteps. Not every episode was great, but even the ones that weren't hits were still pretty good, in my opinion. They were great, entertaining episodes of television. I am going to rate The Last of Us Season 1 95.
You are insane. You have lost your mind. You have lost your mind. So if I were to ask you, do you think The Last of Us TV show season 1 is overrated, you would say no.
I would say no. I think that, there are a lot of things we've spoken about today, especially episodes that I didn't enjoy as much as other episodes.
I'm shell-shocked.
It's still better than a lot of other things that we've seen in recent years. You compare some of the big shows coming out recently. The Mandalorian is shit. There were more enjoyable moments in this season of The Last of Us than there was in, say, House of the Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
House of the Dragon was great. There were great moments in it. A lot more flaws than there were in this. I think you have a big perception of the game as well. You love the game. I know you do. You convinced me to play it. And I love the game too. I love the game. I enjoyed it. I will play it again, and I'll see it with different eyes when I play it again since watching the show. But I really enjoyed the show. It was incredible television. I loved watching it every week. There are flaws. Those flaws are still entertaining to watch. I was never bored watching the show. I never disliked something that I saw. I might not have agreed with it. I might have thought the game was better, but only because I had that knowledge to compare it to.
Yep.
Every episode I thought was still entertaining, good to watch, enjoyed the show as a whole.
95
out of 100.
That's almost 100.
It's up there, man. It's really good.
So many flaws.
Think about recent years.
It's got so many flaws.
I quite like the apocalypse genre, and I've been watching a lot of The Walking Dead again recently.
Yeah,
right?
well, that's probably why you've rated it 95.
Compared to that, they do this really well. I know they barely even focus on part of the apocalypse in it, but it's really good. It's really well done. A lot of the performances are great. A lot of the writing is great. A lot of the moments are great. It's a really good show. It's a really good television show.
All right, well, I think you stand with a majority of the audience, right? This is an extremely beloved, critically acclaimed television show. It's got insane ratings. It's got insane viewership numbers as well. This is a universally loved show, so I think you stand in line with a lot of those people. I'm about to go in. I'll start off with the things I liked, alright? Because there were plenty of things that I liked. Ultimately, it's adapting one of my favorite video games of all time, probably the best video game story I've ever experienced in my entire life, and it's adapting that beat for beat, more or less. So on paper, the story is the same, so that translates. That's something. It's a faithful adaptation. Like, it is absolutely, without a doubt, a successful video game adaptation. No doubt about it. They followed all of the important things that they needed to closely. You know, you can tell that they cared, they were passionate about the game. You can tell it fucking flows through into the show. The incredible production design and the use of practical and visual effects that bring the world to life are incredible. Like the giraffe scene that we didn't even mention in that final episode.
Yeah, that was real.
Yeah, real giraffe. And I really appreciate that they used a real giraffe that people were still saying looked fake because they thought it was CG. But just a lot of like the world building and stuff, they did a great job bringing these specific locations and environments from the game to life, and just also just in general, like the general mood and vibe of it. It never felt cheap to me.
Yeah.
They pulled it off for sure.
It was an incredible achievement just for that.
Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey don't fuck up their performances. If either one of them fucked up their performances, the show would be ruined. They both do a good job at worst, right? I would argue Pedro was stronger than Bella throughout the runtime of the show. I don't think either of them were incredible. I think they were both good to very good range, but they didn't fuck it up, and that was important, and that's really all they needed to do. The writing is on point as well. Like, obviously going verbatim from the game helps out a lot because the game is phenomenally written, and then the stuff that they actually incorporate as well that isn't from the game is really, really solid. Like, this is a really well written TV show. And I really love the flashback teasers as well. Like, I wish we got more of them. We get one in episode 9, we get one in episode 1 and 2. I would have loved to seen one in every single episode. But the ones that we did get, they were fantastic, especially that episode 2 one. And look, you're almost convincing me to change my answer for favorite episode to episode 2.
You sound like you love it.
I fucking do. I love it. I think it's probably more solid than the first episode. But that being said, here's my problems. One of my biggest problems is they don't capture the same sense of danger that the games did. I played through the game on the hardest difficulty, where basically like every missed bullet you wanted to blow your brains out because it was just going to make that sequence impossible. Like if you missed 2 bullets in a row, you'd have to reload the checkpoint because supplies were that scarce. It was such a big struggle. And even if you're not playing on the hardest difficulty, the whole game is built around that. Joel and Ellie overcoming these small obstacles, some are big, some are small, some are just encounter with like a couple of infected, couple of clickers, others are big action set pieces, right? It's just missing from the TV show. The world feels incredibly safe. The pilot sets it up as being dangerous, especially with like that outbreak scene. It's fantastic, it's tense, it shows how dangerous the infected can be. Episode 2 establishes the clickers to be an incredibly tense threat that could just take anyone's life at any moment, and then they forget about it for the rest of the series. And that includes encounters with like armed men. Every time they have like some kind of action sequence, the tension just isn't there after episode 2. The relationship too between Joel and Ellie just does not feel anywhere near as organic as it does in the games, and that's partly down to the pacing issue that I have. Because we don't have those little obstacles that they overcome. Like there's a moment in the game where Joel trusts Ellie to overwatch him during this encounter with these armed men with a rifle. And it's such a great moment because, you know, we're playing Joel and she's watching our back, and it's a big bonding moment where he shows a lot of trust in her to basically put his life in her hands. And we obviously have like the million ladder sequences, which we do get one in episode 9, but like the teamwork and the bonding, that just isn't executed here in the show, right? Yeah. The game does their bond so much more organically, whereas this, I feel like if I didn't have the crux of the game to lean on, and that background of the characters, if I was just wiped my memory from that and watched this, I just wouldn't be as invested with their relationship. I feel like the game is really carrying that aspect for me.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Like, we've obviously got some context to it as well.
Yeah. I would have loved a lot more of Joel teaching Ellie how to survive. You know, he's reluctant for pretty much half the show, and then has like maybe 2 moments where he teaches her anything of value, and I feel like we needed just more of that, you know, like him showing like more scavenging stuff and the survival elements and like more looting. And I hate that they just completely omit more or less the fact that she can't swim. They mention it I think in like the 2nd episode, and that's just never a problem for the rest of the series, yet in the game it kind of is like a big deal because there's multiple like instances where Joel has to figure out a way to help Ellie get across a section of water. And I don't know, I feel like these kinds of moments were just forgotten about. The pacing of the entire show just felt rushed. The final 2 episodes, they needed to be 4. I think this had to be at absolute least 10 episodes long. And even though extra 60 minutes might not sound like a lot, it is a lot. And I'm saying that it needed to be 10 episodes while cutting some stuff that we've already got. And for me, I think 14 or 12 would have been a better number to capture this story. Take a bit more time, make the relationship between these 2 characters a bit more organic. Episode 3, I mentioned it before, like partly due to those pacing concerns, it completely detracts from the story because it just wastes time that we needed to have with Joel and Ellie. Great episode, just doesn't fit this format of a 9-episode season. Another big issue is I think that Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann are fantastic writers. They are poor directors, and I understand that they didn't direct the entire series. I think they had 1 episode each or something, and then a few other directors did the other episodes. But the direction in general of this entire series is just poor. I mentioned a number of examples with the action sequences and how they just mis-executed certain scenes, whether it be an action sequence and the lack of tension, or just a dialogue interaction between 2 characters, or the ending and that montage that we get. They just make continually bad direction decisions in executing these pivotal scenes for me that I think are worse than the game. And then there's a lot of logic flaws as well, like Bill getting shot bothered me a lot, and the townspeople missing in episode 8. Lots of things that were kind of like overlooked that felt a bit sloppy for me, and I really disliked the change of the ending. Like I said, removing that moral complexity and those elements of grey really hurt for me.
Okay, so what would you rate it?
So with all of that being said, I'm going to rate The Last of Us Season 1 a 65
Whoa.
out of 100.
You're tripping.
I'm not tripping. I was too kind on House of the Dragon when I gave that a 70, and I'm done being kind. Obviously, I'm coming from a perspective where I'm holding it to the same standard as the game, and the game is a 10 out of 10 masterpiece, right? So I'm a tough crowd. I accept that. And look, if I hadn't played the game, I'd probably rate this maybe like a 75, 80, right? The enjoyment factor is there for sure. Not arguing that. But it did not live up to the potential that the game had. And I just feel like the decision to rush through and try and get this done in 9 episodes, it felt like we were going from plot point to plot point and we were getting like the sticky note version of the Last of Us story rather than a truly fantastic adaptation that we could have ended up getting. And that's why I gave it 65.
Shit. All right, well, look, I'm excited for our Season 2 podcast when The Last of Us Season 2 comes out, because I fucking love Part 2. I really do. I think it's one of the like best game stories ever made. Genuinely. So I am curious to see
That's
what they do.
That's going to be extra spicy then for us.
What they change about it, if they do change anything. And we're going to have a big fucking talk about that when that comes out.
Well, I'm very interested as well, because like how many episodes are we going to get? We've already heard talks about it's going to be split up into 2 seasons, which is very logical because it's a much bigger game than The Last of Us 1.
Like
so,
double the length.
Yeah, so I feel like 2 seasons is at a minimum like what you need. Will it deviate from the second game? Based off the comments I've heard from Neil Druckmann, he said he's not afraid to make changes, but he does not give a fuck about criticism.
Yeah.
Which basically to
means
me
he's not going to change it.
To me says it'll be extremely similar to what we just got with Season 1. They'll make minor little tweaks here and there that will help translate it to a TV, but they're not going to change some of the big controversial elements of The Last of Us 2 that a ton of gamers just fucking hate. Look, there's elements of Season 2 that I think they need to change, and by the sounds of it, they're not going to, and I think a lot of fans, both game fans and TV fans, are going to hate it. I have one final question for you before we end the podcast. Is The Last of Us Season 1 HBO TV show better than the game?
That's a good question. I knew you were going to ask that at some point. I do not think it's better than the game. Yeah, I'm not going to... For
those of you who don't know, I currently have a gun pointed to Luke's head.
No, this is my genuine opinion. This is my genuine opinion. I loved playing the game. I think it really works as a game. The story really works as a game. And I think there's a lot of moments in the game that didn't show up in the show that really kind of made it special. And like we spoke about, the ending being morally grey is a fantastic way to end that game and set up the second game. The first season was an incredible piece of television. It was well written. I enjoyed a lot of it. There were some moments, very few moments, that I thought were better than the game.
Yep.
Specifically Sarah's death in that pilot episode. That's one of the only things I can think about.
I think it's the only thing that comes close, and
Yeah.
every other like scene for scene or beat for beat moment is objectively worse. Not
Yeah.
saying it's bad, it's just worse.
Yeah, like it's not bad in any kind of way.
No.
It's just comparing it to the game, visually what you see, the context of that moment and playing up to that point
Yeah.
always hits better in the game.
Yeah.
Always.
And it's perfection, and it's due to Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson's incredible performances.
Yeah, and I think it's just a bit more centered in that. You
Yeah.
know, there's less coming in, you're doing it for a game audience, you're putting it forward to this audience for the first time. There's a lot more to consider when making the show. You got to make people happy, you got to appeal it to the game audience, but also appeal it to the new audience. I think they did a fucking amazing job. I think they did a great job. Do I think it's better than the game? No, I don't.
Common sense prevails somewhat.
I really like it. I rated it highly, not bad.
You redeemed yourself somewhat, but I still am shell shocked from the 95 rating. But
It's good. It's a good season of television. Play the game, watch the show.
Well, let us know what your thoughts are about season 1 of the HBO show in the comment section down below, and get hyped for season 2, because given how spicy this episode was, I cannot imagine what season 2 could be like. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. This has been For the Record. I'll see you in the next episode of the For the Record podcast.